Welcome to Tales by Imon. Let's begin our story. The air at Blackwood Creek Asylum always felt heavy, thick with the unspoken histories of its residents. It was a place where time seemed to fold in on itself, where the past was a ghost that haunted every hallway. My name is Dr. Aris Thorne, and for the past 3 years, I'd made it my professional mission to navigate these fractured timelines, to piece together the shattered minds that found their way to this isolated sanctuary in the misty hills of Northwood, California. I considered myself a man of science, a cartographer of the human psyche. I dealt in observable phenomena, in patterns of behavior, in the delicate and often damaged chemistry of the brain. I did not, as a rule, deal in fantasy. And then, I was assigned the patient in Ward 7. Ward 7 was reserved for the most complex cases, the ones the world outside had given up on. It was a place of quiet desperation, of minds locked so tightly within themselves that no key had yet been found. My supervisor, Dr. Evans, had called me into his oak-paneled office, the afternoon sun casting long shadows across his desk. He was a man whose calm demeanor was as much a part of the hospital's foundation as the century-old brick. "Aris," he began, sliding a thin manila folder across the polished wood. "I have a new admission for you." He was transferred from a state facility on the East Coast. "Name's Jacob." I picked up the folder. It was surprisingly light. "What's the preliminary diagnosis?" Dr. Evans steepled his fingers, his gaze steady. "That's the thing." The referring physician was evasive. "Delusional disorder is the official line. Grandiose type." I opened the folder. The first page was a transfer summary. Jacob, no last name provided. Age, appears to be in his late 30s. No known family. No history of violence, yet he was flagged for high security placement. The oddities were already piling up. Why the transfer to Blackwood? And why Ward 7 if he's non-violent? "He's a disruption," Dr. Evans said simply. "Not in a loud or aggressive way. It's his core delusion. It's persistent. It unnerves the other patients. And some of the staff, if I'm being honest." I leaned forward, my curiosity piqued. I'd handled patients who believed they were kings, prophets, secret agents. I treated a woman who was convinced her reflection was an evil twin plotting to replace her. I was not easily unnerved. "What is it? What does he believe?" Dr. Evans paused, as if choosing his next words with surgical precision. "He believes he's from the future." I couldn't help a small, cynical smile. "That's not a new one. I had a gentleman last year who thought he was a starship captain from the 23rd century. It's a classic escape from a traumatic past. We create a future self that is powerful, that has all the answers, to compensate for a present where we feel helpless." "I've read your papers on compensatory ideation, Aris. And I'd normally agree," Dr. Evans said, his expression unchanging. "But you haven't met him. There's a coherence to his narrative, a chilling level of detail. Just be thorough. Your objectivity is why I'm assigning him to you." The walk to Ward 7 was always the same. The bright, hopeful decor of the main building slowly faded, replaced by sterile white walls and reinforced doors. The air grew cooler. The sounds of the hospital, the gentle hum of lights, the distant ring of a telephone, were replaced by a profound silence, punctuated only by the soft squeak of my own shoes and the rhythmic jangle of keys in the hand of Nurse Miller, a woman whose stern face had been a fixture in this ward for 2 decades. "He's been quiet since he arrived this morning," she said, her voice a low, gravelly hum. "Just sits and watches the window." She stopped at the last door on the left, number 713. A small, reinforced glass slit was the only window to the world inside. "He hasn't eaten. Just asked for a glass of water and a notepad." "A notepad? That was unusual." "Yes. And a pen. Said he needed to make some notes before the details fade." She shrugged, the gesture conveying a career's worth of seen-it-all apathy. She unlocked the heavy door, and it swung open with a dull, metallic groan. "Dr. Thorne is here to see you, Jacob." The room was sparse, designed for safety above all else. A bed bolted to the floor, a small, immovable desk and chair, and a single barred window overlooking a patch of overgrown garden. And sitting in the chair, not looking at the garden but at the sky beyond it, was the man named Jacob. He turned his head slowly as I entered. I was immediately struck by his appearance. He wasn't wild-eyed or disheveled, as so many new admissions were. He was calm. His hair was neatly, if a bit long, and his clothes, the standard-issue gray scrubs, were unwrinkled. But it was his eyes that held me. They were a pale, startling blue, and they held a look of profound weariness, a deep, ancient sadness that seemed utterly out of place on his unlined face. He looked at me not as a patient looks at a doctor, but as a scientist might observe a curious specimen. "Dr. Aris Thorne," he said. His voice was clear and steady, with no discernible accent. It was not a question. Doctor of Psychiatry. Graduated top 5% from Stanford Medical School. You've been at Blackwood for 3 years and 2 months. You believe in logic, in evidence, and you are utterly convinced that I am mentally ill. I stopped just inside the door, my well-practiced professional composure momentarily rattled. I hadn't even introduced myself. His knowledge of my background was easily explainable. A new patient might be given some information about their doctor. It was the way he said it, a simple statement of fact. "It's my job to understand what you're experiencing," I said, recovering, as I took a seat in the visitor's chair opposite him. Nurse Miller closed the door, leaving us alone. "The file says you believe you're from the future." He offered a small, sad smile. "The file is correct in its summation, if not in its conclusion. I don't believe it, doctor. Any more than you believe you are sitting in that chair. It is simply where I am from." "And where is that, exactly?" I asked, keeping my tone neutral, inviting. "Here. Northwood, California," he replied. "Just not this when. I was born in 2087. I arrived here, in your time, 3 days ago. The temporal displacement process is imprecise and rather jarring." He spoke with such nonchalant conviction it was disarming. No frantic energy, no desperate need to be believed. He was like a professor lecturing on a mundane subject. I made a note on my own pad. Flat effect. Highly detailed and structured delusion. No apparent emotional distress. "Why are you here, Jacob? In this hospital?" "Because when a man appears out of thin air in the middle of a highway, claiming to be from the future, this is where your society puts him," he said, gesturing vaguely at the room. "It is an understandable, if unfortunate, response. You categorize what you don't understand as madness. In my time, we have different categories." He leaned forward slightly, his blue eyes locking onto mine. The ancient weariness was still there, but now it was sharpened by a glint of urgency. "I am not here to convince you of my sanity, doctor. That would be a waste of what little time I have. I am here to deliver a message. A warning." "A warning about what?" He looked past me, towards the window, as if he could see the years stretching between his time and mine. "About what's coming. About the storm that is gathering just over your horizon. It starts small. It starts with something you won't even notice. It starts tomorrow, at 10:17 a.m. I stared at him, my pen hovering over the paper. The specificity was a classic delusional trait, an attempt to lend credibility to the incredible. "And what happens tomorrow at 10:17 a.m.? I asked, playing along. Jacob turned his gaze back to me. The sadness in his eyes deepened. "The old oak tree," he said, his voice dropping to a near whisper. "The one at the center of the asylum's main courtyard. The one that's been here for 200 years. It's going to fall. And that, Dr. Thorne, is how it begins." I left Jacob's room that afternoon with his final words echoing in my mind. The old oak tree, it's going to fall. It was, I told myself, a textbook example of delusional specificity. In psychiatry, we see it all the time. A patient doesn't just believe they're being watched. They believe they're being watched by a specific government agency through the camera on their laptop, which is broadcasting on a frequency only dogs can hear. The details are a defense mechanism, a way for the fractured mind to build a logical, albeit false, structure around an illogical belief. The ancient oak was the heart of Blackwood Creek. It had stood for centuries, a silent witness to the asylum's entire history. For a patient claiming to see the future, what better symbol to choose for the beginning of a great unraveling? It was poetic. It was symbolic. And it was, of course, impossible. That evening, I wrote up my initial assessment. Patient presents with a highly structured, non-bizarre delusional system. He is calm, cooperative, and articulate. The core belief, that he is a traveler from the future, appears unshakable. He has integrated elements of his immediate environment into his narrative, as evidenced by his specific prediction regarding the asylum's oak tree, a clear symbolic representation of institutional stability. I felt a certain clinical satisfaction as I typed. I had a handle on this. Jacob was a fascinating case, but he was still a case, a puzzle of synapses and psychology that I was trained to solve. The next morning was bright and painfully clear. The California sky was a vast, cloudless blue. There wasn't a whisper of wind. As I walked from the staff parking lot, I passed the courtyard. The oak tree stood exactly as it had every other day of my career. Its massive branches, heavy with dark green leaves, reached out like protective arms over the manicured lawn. A few residents were walking the stone paths, enjoying the calm morning. It was a picture of perfect tranquility. The idea of it falling was laughable. My morning was filled with the usual routine. A group therapy session for anxiety disorders in Ward 3, a medication review for a long-term schizophrenic patient, paperwork, phone calls. Yet, through it all, a part of my brain was a clock, counting down. I tried to push it away. It was irrational. Allowing a patient's delusion to dictate my emotional state was unprofessional. But the sheer, placid certainty in Jacob's eyes haunted me. He hadn't been manic or hysterical. He had spoken like a man announcing the day's weather. At 10:05 a.m., I was in my office, trying to focus on a research paper. My window overlooked a different part of the campus, a small rose garden. But I knew the courtyard was just around the corner. I found myself imagining the sound. The splintering of ancient wood, the thunderous crash. It was ridiculous. I stood up and paced the small room, annoyed at myself. I was letting the patient get under my skin. "Everything all right, Dr. Thorne?" Nurse Miller was standing at my open door, a chart in her hand. "You look like you're about to burn a hole in the carpet." "Just thinking, Brenda," I said, forcing a smile. "My new patient in 713, Jacob." Her expression tightened almost imperceptibly. "The time traveler." "Yes. He's been quiet. Refused breakfast again. Just sitting, same as yesterday." "He made a prediction," I said, trying to make it sound like a clinical curiosity. "Told me the big oak in the courtyard would fall today. At 10:17. Nurse Miller gave a short, humorless laugh. "Is that right? Well, he's got about 10 minutes to make it happen. That tree has survived 3 earthquakes and a lightning strike in my time here. I think it'll manage to survive his psychosis." She handed me the chart. "Dr. Evans wants your signature on the new protocols for Ward 4. She left, and I was alone again with the clock on my wall. The black second hand was sweeping in its relentless circle. 10:12. I should be working. I should be signing the protocols. Instead, I walked to the window, craning my neck to try and get a glimpse of the courtyard, but the angle was wrong. All I could see were the red tiles of the administration wing's roof. 10:14. My heart was beating a little faster. It was absurd. I felt like a child who had been told a ghost story and was now afraid of the dark, even while knowing it was make-believe. This was a test, I reasoned. A test of my own objectivity. 10:15. I walked out of my office and down the hall to a small break room that I knew had a perfect view of the main courtyard. A few nurses were chatting by the coffee machine. I ignored them and went straight to the large window, leaning against the sill. The tree stood magnificent, unmoving. The scene was utterly, peacefully normal. One of the gardeners was trimming a hedge nearby. 10:16. I felt a wave of relief. It was almost over. I could go back to Jacob's room this afternoon, my diagnosis confirmed, and we could begin the real work of dismantling this fantasy. We could talk about the trauma he was running from, the past he felt the need to escape. I had my footing back. I was the doctor. He was the patient. The clock on the break room wall, a large, simple circle with black numbers, ticked over to 10:17 a.m. For a moment, nothing happened. The sun shone. The gardener clipped his hedge. I let out a breath I didn't realize I'd been holding. Of course. What else did I expect? Then I heard it. Not a crack of thunder or a gust of wind. It was a low, mechanical groaning sound. The nurses stopped talking. The gardener paused, looking around, confused. My eyes shot to the base of the tree. Parked on the service path about 50 feet away was a large municipal water truck. It had been there for 2 days, part of some routine maintenance on the asylum's plumbing. And now, it was moving. It wasn't driving. It was rolling, silently at first, then picking up speed as the gentle slope of the service path guided it directly towards the courtyard. There were no shouts, no driver trying to stop it. It was a ghost vehicle, a 2-ton steel battering ram on a collision course with the oldest resident of Blackwood Creek. Time seemed to slow down. I saw the gardener drop his shears and run. I saw the faces of the nurses beside me, their mouths open in silent OS of disbelief. The truck left the asphalt path, its tires bouncing silently on the soft grass, its trajectory unwavering. The impact was not the sharp crack I had imagined, but a deep, sickening thud that seemed to vibrate through the very foundation of the building. The massive truck slammed into the ancient trunk, burying its front bumper deep into the wood. For a horrifying second, the great oak shuddered, its entire canopy of leaves trembling as if in a violent seizure. Then, with a groan that sounded like a dying giant, a sound of wood fibers tearing apart that was older than the hospital itself, it began to lean. Slowly at first, then with gathering, unstoppable momentum, the 200-year-old oak tree crashed to the ground, its branches shattering on the stone pathways and throwing a plume of dust and leaves into the tranquil morning air. The silence that followed was more profound than the crash itself. Then, alarms began to sound. People were shouting outside. The break room was a flurry of motion as nurses ran for the door. I remained frozen at the window, my knuckles white where I gripped the sill. My mind, the rational, scientific mind of Dr. Aris Thorne, was a complete blank. It frantically searched for an explanation. Brake failure. A freak accident. Coincidence. But my gut knew better. It wasn't a coincidence. Not the event. And certainly not the timing. My eyes moved from the wreckage in the courtyard, lifting past the rooftops, toward the sterile, silent wing of the hospital I could just barely see. Ward 7. The puzzle I thought I was solving had just been shattered, replaced by a terrifying, impossible question. And I knew, with a certainty that chilled me to the bone, that the only person with the answer was sitting in room 713. For how long I stood at that window, I can't say. Seconds stretched into minutes. My mind, usually a fortress of logic and order, was a landscape of smoking rubble. Down in the courtyard, chaos had found its rhythm. Paramedics were attending to the gardener, who had apparently fallen in his haste to get away. Security personnel were cordoning off the area with yellow tape. Dr. Evans was there, his usual calm replaced by a mask of stern concern as he directed the staff. Everyone was looking for a rational explanation. They were talking about brake lines, maintenance logs, and incline angles. They were building a neat little box of cause and effect to put the impossible event into. But I knew the truth was not in that box. The truth was sitting in a locked room in Ward 7, waiting for me. My legs felt heavy, disconnected from my body, as I finally turned from the window. The other nurses had gone, called to action by the emergency. The abandoned coffee cups and half-eaten donuts on the counter seemed like artifacts from a different era, from a world that had existed only 10 minutes ago. I walked out of the break room and back into the hallway, the distant wail of a police siren growing louder. Every step toward Ward 7 was a step away from the world I knew. I was a scientist, and I had just witnessed a miracle. Or a trick. A trick so profound it was indistinguishable from a miracle. My mind raced, trying to construct a scenario. Could Jacob have had an accomplice? Someone on the outside? Could he have somehow studied the truck, known its brakes were faulty, and simply made an educated guess? It was a wild, desperate stretch, but it was saner than the alternative. As I reached the reinforced door to the high-security ward, I saw Nurse Miller leaning against the wall, her face pale. The scene-it-all apathy was gone, replaced by a raw, human shock. "Brenda," I said, my voice sounding hollow to my own ears. She looked up, her eyes wide. "Did you hear? They're saying it was a freak accident. The parking brake failed. It just rolled." She shook her head, her gaze distant. "The timing. God, Aris. You said he predicted it. The exact minute." "I know," I said quietly. "How?" she whispered, the question hanging in the sterile air between us. How could he possibly know something like that? I had no answer for her. I only had a growing dread. I nodded toward the keypad. "I need to see him." She hesitated for a fraction of a second, a flicker of something new in her eyes as she looked at me, not just fear of the event, but fear of what I might find. She punched in the code and the heavy lock clicked open. I walked down the silent corridor, the sound of my own breathing loud in my ears. The world outside door 713 was in chaos because of a prediction made inside it, and the man who made it had not made a sound. I entered without knocking. The scene was exactly as I had left it the day before. Jacob was sitting at the small desk, his back to me, the notepad and pen in his hands. The afternoon light from the barred window fell across his shoulders. He didn't seem to have moved at all. He didn't turn around as the heavy door closed behind me, sealing us in together. "It was louder than I remembered," he said, his voice calm, conversational. He was still writing in the notepad. "The sound. You forget the smaller sensory details over time. It's one of the first things to fade." I stood there, my hands clenched into fists at my sides. My clinical detachment was gone, replaced by a volatile mix of fear, anger, and awe. "How?" I demanded, my voice tight. "Don't give me any more stories about temporal displacement. How did you do it? Did you have help? Did you bribe a maintenance worker?" Sabotage the truck yourself before you were admitted. He finally stopped writing and placed the pen neatly beside the pad. He turned in his chair to face me, and the weariness in his pale blue eyes seemed to have deepened. There was no triumph in his expression, no hint of "I told you so." There was only a profound, soul-crushing sadness. "You're still trying to fit it into your world, Doctor," he said softly. "You're looking for a trick. A conspiracy. Because a trick, even a brilliant one, is preferable to the truth. A trick means your world is still intact. The rules still apply." "What is the truth, Jacob?" I shot back, taking a step closer. "The truth is a man in a locked ward predicted a 1 in a million accident down to the precise minute it happened. That's not a message, that's a magic trick. So tell me how you did it." "I didn't do anything," he replied, his voice still level, frustratingly calm. "I just remembered it. In my timeline, the fall of the Blackwood Oak is a footnote in the history books. A local anomaly that occurred on September 2nd, 2025. It's famous because it was the first domino. The first small, strange event in a chain that leads to everything else." He looked down at his hands. "I needed you to see it. I needed one person, a person of science and logic, to have the foundation of their world shaken. Not broken, just shaken. Enough to listen." I stared at him, my anger deflating, replaced by a chilling emptiness. He wasn't lying. I didn't know how I knew, but I did. The conviction in his voice went beyond delusion. It was the simple, unadorned tone of a witness. "Listen to what?" I finally asked, my voice barely a whisper. "You said you had a warning. What is it?" He picked up the pen again, but didn't write. He just held it. "The tree was just to get your attention, Doctor. It was a spectacle. The real events, the ones that truly matter, are never that loud. They happen in silence. They happen to people no one is watching." He paused, and his eyes met mine. The urgency I had seen before was back, a burning pinpoint in the sea of his weariness. "Tomorrow morning, the San Francisco Chronicle will publish a small article on page B4. It will be a minor story, just a few paragraphs long. It will detail the death of a city electrical engineer named Michael Chen. The police will rule it an accident. A fall from a utility pole he was servicing in the Richmond district. They will say he was electrocuted after the fall. They will be wrong." My mind was reeling. Michael Chen. Page B4. The details were so mundane, so specific. "Why are you telling me this? What does an engineer's death have to do with anything?" "Mr. Chen wasn't just an engineer," Jacob said, his voice dropping, becoming more intense. "He was a whistleblower. He discovered a flaw, a vulnerability, in the city's new integrated power grid. A flaw that, if exploited, could plunge the entire Bay Area into darkness for weeks. He was scheduled to meet with a reporter from the Chronicle in 3 days. His accident ensures that meeting will never happen." "A flaw that leads to what?" I pressed. "The storm you mentioned?" Jacob gave me that same sad, pitying smile. "The storm isn't a blackout, Doctor. The blackout is just the cover. It's the moment when the lights go out that allows the Rayol storm to begin, when no one can see it coming." He leaned forward. "They killed him to keep him quiet. The official report will be a lie, but there will be proof." "What proof?" "Check the coroner's preliminary report. There will be trace amounts of a beta blocker called metoprolol in his system. He wasn't prescribed it. He had a perfectly healthy heart. It was given to him to induce cardiac arrhythmia, to make him dizzy, to make him fall. It's a quiet, elegant, untraceable way to commit murder. But they were sloppy. The dosage was small, but it will be there." He finally looked away, back toward the barred window. "The falling tree opened your eyes, Doctor. Michael Chen's death is the first step on the path. You have to see it. You have to follow it." He turned his back to me then, picking up his notepad as if the conversation was over. I stood there, frozen, the name Michael Chen and the word metoprolol echoing in the silent room. He had given me another prediction. But this one was different. It wasn't a spectacle I could watch from a window. It was a breadcrumb. And he was asking me to follow it, to step out of the asylum and into the world he claimed to know was coming. I don't remember walking out of Ward 7. I don't remember the drive home from the asylum. My mind was a loop of 3 things: a falling tree, the name Michael Chen, and the word metoprolol. The familiar 20-mile drive along the winding coastal highway felt alien, as if I were seeing the world through a stranger's eyes. The setting sun painted the Pacific in hues of orange and purple, a sight that usually calmed my nerves, but tonight it only felt like a prelude to a long, encroaching darkness. My tidy, minimalist apartment, normally a sanctuary of order, felt like a cage. Sleep was out of the question. I paced my living room for hours, the city lights of Northwood twinkling below my window. Every rational part of my brain was at war with the undeniable evidence of my own eyes. Coincidence. It had to be a coincidence. A patient with a savant-like ability to calculate probabilities, perhaps? A man who had somehow researched geological fault lines and municipal maintenance schedules and combined them into a stunningly accurate guess? I tried to build the theory, brick by logical brick, but it collapsed under its own weight. There was no way to logically explain the 10:17 a.m. No way. And now, this. Michael Chin. A specific name, a specific place, a specific lie, and a specific chemical to prove it. This was different from the tree. The tree was a spectacle, an act of God or a freak accident that Jacob had somehow foreseen. This was a conspiracy. This was murder. This was a thread he was asking me to pull, knowing it was attached to something monstrous. What if it was all part of the delusion? An incredibly elaborate, layered fantasy designed to pull me in, to make me a character in his psychotic drama. That had to be it. It was the only explanation that allowed me to remain Dr. Aris Thorne, psychiatrist. The alternative was too terrifying to contemplate. I was at a newsstand before the sun had fully risen, my hands trembling slightly as I paid for a copy of the San Francisco Chronicle. The air was cool and smelled of sea salt and coffee. People around me were starting their day, complaining about traffic, ordering lattes, living in a world that still made sense. I felt profoundly alone, the sole keeper of a terrible secret. I got back in my car, tossing the paper onto the passenger seat. I couldn't bring myself to open it. For as long as it remained folded, I could still pretend. I could still believe that I was just a doctor, and Jacob was just a patient. I drove to a small diner overlooking the ocean and ordered a black coffee I didn't want. Finally, with a deep breath that did nothing to calm my racing heart, I opened the paper. I skipped the headlines, the sports section, the glossy ads. My fingers felt clumsy as I navigated to the B section, the local news. B1, B2, B3. My eyes scanned the columns of text, a part of me praying I wouldn't find it. And then I saw it. Page B4. Halfway down the page, next to an ad for a dental clinic, was a small headline, "City Engineer Dies in Workplace Accident." My blood ran cold. The article was short, just 4 paragraphs. It described how Michael Chen, a 42-year-old electrical engineer for the city, had suffered a fatal fall from a utility pole in the Richmond district. The preliminary police report suggested he had lost his footing and made contact with a live wire during the fall. An unfortunate, tragic accident. It was exactly as Jacob had described. The mundane placement, the official story, the name. It was all there, printed in black and white. The coffee cup rattled in its saucer as I put it down. The waitress gave me a concerned look. I must have looked like I'd seen a ghost. In a way, I had. The ghost of Jacob's impossible knowledge. The tree could have been a fluke. This was a pattern. This was confirmation. I left a $10 bill on the table and walked out of the diner in a daze. The world no longer felt stable beneath my feet. Jacob wasn't just predicting events, he was revealing the truth hidden beneath them. And he had given me the key to unlock it, meta prologue. But the newspaper was public. The coroner's report was not. How could I possibly get my hands on a confidential toxicology screen from a police investigation in a different city? My mind raced through options, most of them impossible. I was a psychiatrist. I had no jurisdiction, no authority. I could go to the police, of course. But what would I say? A patient in my high-security asylum, who claims to be from the year 2087, told me this was a murder. They would thank me for my time and have me professionally evaluated. Then, a name surfaced from the depths of my memory. Ben Carter. Dr. Ben Carter. We had been roommates at Stanford Medical School. We were close once, navigating the brutal landscape of exams and residency together, but our paths had diverged. I went into the ethereal world of the mind, and he went into the grimly physical world of the body. He was a pathologist, and the last I'd heard, he was working in the San Francisco Chief Medical Examiner's office. I hadn't spoken to him in nearly 5 years. My hand was shaking as I pulled out my phone and found his number, still saved from a forgotten time. What would I even say? I rehearsed a dozen lies as the phone rang, each one sounding more pathetic than the last. Carter, a tired, familiar voice answered on the third ring. Ben, it's Aris. Aris Thorne. There was a pause. Thorne. Wow. That's a voice from the past. How the hell are you? Still listening to people's problems up in that fancy hospital by the sea? Something like that, I said, trying to keep my voice steady. Listen, Ben, I know this is out of the blue, but I need a favor. It's a professional matter. Oh yeah. I could hear him sipping coffee. Don't tell me one of your patients finally snapped and you need me to look at the body. He chuckled. It wasn't funny. No, nothing like that. It's about a case that might have come through your office. A city engineer, Michael Chin, died yesterday in the Richmond district. Another pause, this one longer. Chen. Yeah, I think I saw the intake form this morning. Accidental electrocution, fall from a pole. Why? You know him. Here it was. The moment I stepped off the edge. Not personally, I lied, the words tasting like ash. His sister is a patient of mine. She's fragile. She's convinced there was foul play. It's part of a larger persecutory delusion I'm treating, and honestly, being able to definitively tell her that the toxicology report was clean, that there was nothing unusual, it would be a huge help in her treatment. It would help me put her mind at ease. It was a plausible story, a little convoluted, but it fit within the box of my profession. Ben was quiet for a moment. I could hear him typing on a keyboard. You're putting me in a tight spot, Aris. These reports are confidential until they're finalized. I know, Ben. I wouldn't ask if it wasn't important. I don't need the whole report. Just, was there anything unusual in the preliminary talk screen? Anything at all? He sighed heavily. Look, the full screen won't be back for a day or two, but I can check the initial blood panel when it comes across my desk. I'll see what I can do. No promises. Thank you, Ben. I owe you. Yeah, you do, he said, though his tone was softening. It's good to hear from you, man. Even if you are a pain in the ass. I'll call you if I find anything. We hung up. I sat in my car, the newspaper still open on the seat beside me, the small, insignificant article about Michael Chen staring up at me like an indictment. I had done it. I had pulled the thread. I had lied, I had manipulated an old friend, and I had inserted myself into the life and death of a total stranger, all on the word of a man who believed he was from the future. I was no longer an observer. I was a conspirator. And now, all I could do was wait for a phone call that would either send me spiraling back to the safety of my ordered, scientific world, or confirm that it was gone forever. The drive back to Blackwood Creek Asylum was a blur. I operated on autopilot, my mind a million miles away, stuck in a morgue in San Francisco, waiting for a blood test. I had crossed a Rubicon. The simple act of making that phone call had transformed me. I was no longer a doctor studying a delusion. I was an investigator pursuing a lead given to me by a man who was either a prophet or a madman of unprecedented genius. There was no longer a comfortable middle ground. Walking through the asylum's familiar halls felt like walking on a movie set. The polished floors, the faintly medicinal smell, the quiet murmurs of staff and patients, it was all the same, yet fundamentally different. I was seeing it all through a new filter, a filter of suspicion. The world I had dedicated my life to, the measurable, explainable world of the human mind, suddenly felt fragile, like a thin veneer over a reality I couldn't begin to comprehend. My day was a study in feigned normalcy. I met with a young woman suffering from severe OCD, her ritualistic behaviors a desperate attempt to impose order on a chaotic inner world. I listened patiently, offered strategies, and adjusted her medication. An hour ago, I would have seen her as a complex but understandable clinical case. Now, I felt a strange kinship with her. Weren't we all just trying to impose order on chaos? The only difference was that her chaos was internal. Mine had just crashed a truck into a tree and was now lying on a slab in the city morgue. Around noon, Dr. Evans stopped me in the hallway. Aris, a moment. His expression was, as always, professionally placid, but his eyes were sharp. I've been reading the preliminary reports on yesterday's incident. A truly bizarre mechanical failure. Truly bizarre, I agreed, my voice carefully neutral. How is your patient in 713 taking all this? He asked, getting to the heart of the matter. It must be quite a win for his delusional system. A coincidence of that magnitude could reinforce his beliefs for years. I felt a flush of heat rise in my neck. The lie came more easily than I expected. He's been stable, unchanged. In fact, he's barely mentioned it. He seems more focused on other aspects of his narrative. It was the truth, in a way. The tree was already old news to Jacob. Dr. Evans nodded slowly, observing me. Good. Keep a close eye on him. We don't want this event to cause a regression. Your objectivity is more crucial now than ever." His words felt like a warning. My objectivity. The very foundation of my career was the one thing I had completely lost. I nodded, promised to keep him updated, and escaped to my office, the weight of the deception pressing down on me. I spent the next few hours staring at patient files, reading the same paragraphs over and over without absorbing a single word. My attention was tethered to the silent black rectangle of my cell phone sitting on the desk. Every time it vibrated with an email notification, my entire nervous system fired. My body was in a constant state of high alert, waiting for a call that might never come. What if Ben found nothing? The thought was both terrifying and comforting. If the toxicology report was clean, it meant the newspaper article was just another coincidence, a lucky guess in a sea of delusional ramblings. It would mean Jacob was wrong. It would mean I could go back to being a doctor. I could step back from the edge. But I knew, with a certainty that defied all logic, that the phone would ring, and that it would not bring good news. The afternoon sun was slanting low, casting long shadows across my office, when it finally happened. The phone didn't buzz. It rang, a shrill, insistent sound that shattered the quiet. The caller ID read, Ben Carter. My hand was shaking so badly it took me 2 attempts to answer. Aris Thorne. Aris. Ben. His voice was different. The jovial, tired tone from the morning was gone, replaced by something quiet, cautious, and deeply confused. I looked into that thing for you. And I asked, my own voice a strained whisper. And it's weird, he said. This is completely off the record, you understand? I could get my ass fired for this. I understand, Ben. What did you find? I could hear him exhale, a long, troubled sound. Okay, so the full workup is still pending. But the initial blood chemistry panel came back about an hour ago, and something got flagged. Something the lab tech couldn't make sense of. I held my breath, my knuckles white where I gripped the phone. The world seemed to shrink to the sound of his voice. We found something in his system. It's a trace amount, barely detectable. Way below any kind of therapeutic or toxic level, which is why it's so strange. If you weren't looking for it, you'd dismiss it as background noise, a false positive. What was it, Ben? I pressed, my heart hammering against my ribs. There was a pause, and I could hear the rustle of paper on his end. It was a beta blocker, he said, and the floor seemed to drop out from under me. Specifically, metoprolol. My vision swam. I leaned forward, bracing my hands on my desk to keep from falling. It was real. It was all real. Jacob hadn't just predicted the lie. He had known the specific, microscopic truth hidden inside it. Aris, you still there? Ben's voice was laced with concern. I'm here, I managed to say, the words feeling thick in my mouth. The thing is, Ben continued, his voice low and conspiratorial, it makes no sense. I pulled Chen's medical history from his GP. The guy was in perfect health, ran marathons, had the heart of a 20-year-old. He had absolutely no prescription for metoprolol, no reason to ever be taking it. It won't be listed as a contributing factor to the death. The amount is too small. Officially, this will be an accidental death. But unofficially, it's a loose thread. A damn weird one. I closed my eyes, the image of Jacob's calm, sad face burning in my mind. A quiet, elegant, untraceable way to commit murder. Aris, Ben said, his voice dropping even lower. I did this as a favor. Now you have to do something for me. You have to tell me what's going on. Your story about his delusional sister, that was bullshit, wasn't it? How did you know to ask about a specific beta blocker in a man you've never met? What the hell have you gotten yourself into? The question hung in the silent office, heavy and unanswerable. I had my proof. The cold, hard, scientific fact that I had so desperately needed. Jacob was telling the truth. But that truth had come at a cost. It had pulled my friend into a dangerous mystery and exposed me as a liar. And as I sat there, speechless, I realized with a terrifying clarity that this was no longer Jacob's story. It was mine. And the storm he had warned me about was no longer on the horizon. I was in the heart of it. Ben's question echoed in the oppressive silence of my office. What the hell have you gotten yourself into? It was the voice of the rational world, the world I had abandoned, demanding an explanation I couldn't possibly give. My mind raced, searching for a lie that was strong enough to protect him from a truth that would sound like madness. Ben, you have to listen to me, I began, my voice low and urgent. You were right. My story about the patient's sister was a fabrication, a therapeutic one. My patient, she has a unique condition. auditory and visual hallucinations with an incredible degree of detail. She described a man, Michael Chen, and a conversation she believed she overheard. She mentioned the drug. It was a shot in the dark, Ben. I was trying to prove to her that her hallucinations weren't real. I was trying to show her that the details were wrong. I hated the lie, hated the taste of it, but it was the only armor I could offer him. I never, in a million years, thought it would be true. There was a long, heavy silence on the other end of the line. I could picture him in his sterile lab, surrounded by the cold logic of science, trying to process what I was saying. You're telling me your patient hallucinated a murder conspiracy down to the specific chemical agent? I'm telling you that's my story, and it's the only one I can give, I said, my voice pleading. And now I'm asking you as my friend, to forget this conversation ever happened. Forget the name Chen, forget the drug. Finalize the report, rule it an accident, and walk away. Please, Ben. For your own sake. For my sake, he scoffed, but the disbelief in his voice was now tinged with fear. Aris, what is going on? I don't know yet, I said, and it was the most honest thing I had said all day. But it's dangerous. Just let it go. He was quiet for another moment. All right, Aris, he finally said, his voice strained. I'll drop it. But be careful. Whatever this is, it doesn't feel right. He hung up, and I was left alone with the ringing silence. The confirmation I had sought was now a toxic secret, a secret that had already implicated a friend. The weight of it was suffocating. I stood up and walked to my office window. The asylum grounds were bathed in the soft glow of twilight. The staff were changing shifts, their movements routine and predictable. But I knew now that the walls of Blackwood Creek were not keeping the chaos of the world out. They were keeping me in, a prisoner of my own knowledge, while the real world outside was beginning to unravel. My hesitation was gone, replaced by a cold, sharp certainty. The time for observation was over. I had to go back to him. I left my office, not bothering to lock the door, and walked with a purpose I hadn't felt before. The journey toward Seven was no longer a descent into the unknown. It felt like a pilgrimage. He was the only person on Earth who knew what I knew. He was the only one who could tell me what to do next. When Nurse Miller saw me approaching the ward's entrance, she simply nodded and keyed in the code, her expression a mixture of fear and reluctant respect. She didn't ask why I was going back. I think she already knew. I found Jacob just as I had left him, sitting at his desk. But this time, the notepad was closed. He turned as I entered, and his pale blue eyes held no surprise. It was as if he'd been waiting for the echo of Ben's phone call to reach him across time. He found it, I said. It wasn't a question. Yes, Jacob replied simply. The truth has a way of showing up, even in the smallest of doses. They murdered him, Jacob. A man I never knew, a city engineer. They killed him to cover up a flaw in the power grid. You knew it would happen, and you let it. The accusation flew out of me, born of fear and a desperate need to find some moral high ground. His weary gaze didn't waver. His death was a fixed point, Doctor. A historical fact. I can no more stop it than I can stop the sun from rising. I cannot change the past, your present. I can only hope to influence the future, your future. And to do that, I needed you to believe. I believe, I said, the words feeling inadequate for the cataclysmic shift that had occurred in my soul. So what now? What is this storm? Who are they? What do you want from me? They are the ones who benefit from the chaos, he said, his voice low. The blackout Michael Chen was trying to prevent is not the goal, it's the opportunity. It's the cover of darkness under which they will make their move. We don't have time to stop them. We can only expose them. And to do that, we need the proof that Michael Chen died for. The data about the power grid, I said, remembering. Jacob nodded. They took his computers, his files, his entire life's work. They think they have it all. But they're wrong. Michael was a careful man. He knew he was in danger. He made one physical copy of his most critical data, a single flash drive, and he hid it. Where? I demanded. The police will have sealed his apartment, his office. He didn't hide it in his own life, Jacob said, a flicker of something, admiration perhaps, in his eyes. He hid it in a place of public knowledge, a place of quiet anonymity. He hid it in the Northwood Public Library. The sheer simplicity of it was brilliant. Close to me, far from him. How do you know this? Because in my time, a historian uncovered his last journal entry. It was cryptic, but we eventually deciphered it. Most of it is irrelevant now, but I remember the key. He leaned forward, his eyes locking onto mine. He was a lover of classic literature. He hid the drive inside a hollowed-out copy of Herman Melville's Moby Dick. The specific copy is in the American Literature section. Call number PS 2384 M6. The details were dizzying. A call number. A specific book in a specific library. I have to go there, I said, the plan forming even as he spoke. I'll go tonight. Yes, Jacob said. But you must understand, Doctor. The moment you take that drive, you cease to be a footnote. The people who killed Michael Chen are not fools. They are thorough. When they realize his data is missing, they will begin to search for it. They will look for anyone who showed an interest in him. A psychiatrist from a local asylum whose friend, a pathologist, made an unauthorized inquiry into the victim's toxicology report. The blood drained from my face. They could connect me to Ben. They could connect Ben to Chen. I had not only put myself in danger, but I had painted a target on my friend's back. They will be watching, Jacob continued, his voice a grim whisper. From this moment on, you are no longer just Dr. Aris Thorne. You are part of the equation. You are a threat. Be smart, be quiet, and do not underestimate them. He turned back to his desk. The audience concluded. I stood there for a long moment, the library call number seared into my brain. He had given me my mission. I walked out of the room, past Nurse Miller's worried gaze, and out of the asylum. The cool night air felt electric on my skin. I was no longer a doctor. I was a spy, a thief, a conspirator. And I was about to walk into a public library to steal a secret that had already cost one man his life. The Northwood Public Library was a sanctuary of silence, a stark contrast to the storm raging inside my head. It was an old building, constructed from stone and dark wood, and it smelled of aging paper and floor polish, a scent I usually found comforting. Tonight, it felt like the air in a mausoleum. Every cough, every rustle of a turning page, every soft footstep on the worn carpet seemed amplified, a potential signal of discovery. Jacob's warning echoed in my mind. They will be watching. I tried to look casual, like any other resident seeking a book on a quiet Wednesday evening. I kept my head down, my hands in my pockets, my gaze sweeping the cavernous main reading room. A handful of college students were hunched over laptops. An elderly woman was methodically working her way through a stack of magazines. At a long table near the back, a man in a plain gray windbreaker sat with a newspaper spread out before him, though his eyes seemed to be fixed on the space above it. I catalogued him, my newly awakened paranoia flagging him as a possibility. He looked perfectly ordinary, which, I was quickly learning, was the most suspicious thing of all. I forced myself to walk to a public computer terminal, my heart thudding against my ribs. I had to create a plausible trail, a normal reason for being here. I sat down and pretended to browse the internet, my eyes scanning the reflection of the room in the dark screen. The man with the newspaper didn't move. After a few minutes that felt like an eternity, I opened the library's online catalog. My fingers felt clumsy on the keyboard as I typed in the call number Jacob had given me, the sequence of letters and numbers feeling like a secret code. PS 2384 M6. The screen refreshed. A single entry appeared. Melville, Herman. Moby Dick. Status: available. Section: American Literature, 2nd floor. My breath caught in my throat. It was here. It was real. I logged off the computer and stood up, trying to make my movements slow and deliberate. I made a show of browsing a display of new fiction near the front desk before heading for the wide, creaking staircase that led to the 2nd floor. With each step, I felt as though I were ascending toward my own destiny or my doom. The 2nd floor was even quieter, almost deserted. The stacks were long, narrow aisles of towering metal shelves, creating a labyrinth of knowledge and shadow. The air was warmer up here, and the only sound was the gentle hum of the fluorescent lights overhead. I found the sign for the American Literature section and turned into the correct aisle. The world shrank to this single corridor of books. I felt completely exposed, a solitary figure in a forest of silent stories. My eyes scanned the white labels on the spines, my pulse drumming in my ears. Poe, Pound, Roth. Then I saw it. PS 2384. A row of Melville. And there, tucked between two thicker volumes, was the book. Moby Dick. The cover was a dark, unassuming blue, the title embossed in faded gold letters. It looked utterly ordinary. I hesitated for a moment, my hand hovering in the air. This was the point of no return. Taking this book from the shelf was an act of allegiance. It was choosing Jacob's world over mine. I took one last, sweeping glance down the empty aisle. Seeing no one, I plucked the book from its place. It felt wrong in my hand. Not heavy enough. I ran my thumb along the edge of the pages. Near the middle, I could feel a subtle but distinct seam. My breath hitched. With the book held tight against my chest, I moved quickly to the end of the aisle, finding a small, isolated study carrel tucked away in a dusty corner. I sat down, my back to the wall, giving me a clear view of anyone who might approach. My hands trembled as I laid the book on the desk and opened it. The first 100 or so pages were normal. Then, I found it. A large rectangular section of the book's interior had been expertly hollowed out, the cut edges sealed with some kind of glue. It was a perfect cavity, a book-shaped safe. And resting inside, nestled in the heart of the great white whale story, was a tiny, black flash drive. I stared at it, mesmerized. This was it. The secret Michael Chen had died to protect. The data that could, according to Jacob, expose a monstrous conspiracy. For a moment, a wave of triumphant adrenaline surged through me. I had done it. I had found it. I carefully lifted the small drive from its hiding place. It was warm to the touch, as if it still held some residual energy from the man who had placed it there. I slipped it deep into my pants pocket, the small rectangle of plastic feeling as heavy as a block of lead. My mission was to get the drive and get out. I closed the book, stood up, and slid it back into its place on the shelf. No one would ever know. I turned to leave the aisle, a sense of relief washing over me. But as I reached the end of the stacks, my relief vaporized, replaced by a spike of pure, cold fear. Standing at the main intersection of the aisles, effectively blocking my path to the staircase, was the man from the reading room. The man with the gray windbreaker and the newspaper. He wasn't looking at me. He was examining a book of poetry, his posture relaxed. But his position was no accident. He was between me and the exit. He hadn't followed me up. He had anticipated me. He casually glanced up, his eyes meeting mine for a fraction of a second. There was no recognition in them, no malice, just a flat, empty appraisal. But I knew, with a certainty that rooted my feet to the floor, that he was not here for poetry. The silence of the library pressed in on me, no longer comforting, but predatory. I had the secret in my pocket. But I was no longer alone, and the sanctuary had just become a trap. Panic is a cold, sharp thing. It seized the base of my spine and shot up into my brain, overriding every rational thought. My first instinct was to run, to bolt past him, but I suppressed it. A man running in a silent library is a man with something to hide. Jacob's voice whispered in my memory, "Be smart. Be quiet." The man in the gray windbreaker hadn't moved. He casually flipped a page in the book of poetry, his body a relaxed, unbreachable wall. He was waiting for me to make the first move. This wasn't a confrontation, it was a test. He wanted to see what I would do. I forced my body to unclench. My hands, which had balled into fists, I deliberately relaxed. I turned away from him, back toward the shelf I had just come from, pretending a sudden renewed interest in Herman Melville. My mind, however, was in overdrive, mapping the geography of the second floor. The main staircase was out. To my left, the stacks ended at a large window overlooking the street 2 stories below, a dead end. To my right, the aisle stretched on for another 50 feet before opening into a wider area with study tables and, hopefully, another way down. That was my only path. I picked a random book from the shelf, opened it, and stared blankly at the page, my eyes seeing nothing. I held it for a full minute, my senses screaming. I could feel his presence behind me, a weight in the air. Was he watching me? Had he moved closer? I risked a tiny, peripheral glance. He was still there, a statue of casual menace. He was patient. He knew he had me cornered. Fine. If he was waiting for me to act, I would. But not in the way he expected. A few feet away from me was a tall, rolling library cart, the kind librarians use to reshelf books. It was piled high, perhaps a bit too high, with heavy art history volumes. An idea, desperate and loud, sparked in the panic. A diversion. With my heart pounding a frantic rhythm against my ribs, I took a deep breath. I stepped back from the shelf, pretending to stumble over my own feet. I let my arm swing out, as if to catch my balance, and slammed my hand into the side of the metal cart. The effect was instantaneous and spectacular. The cart, top-heavy and precariously balanced, tipped. For a moment it seemed to hang in the air, and then it went over with a cataclysmic crash. Dozens of heavy hardbound books cascaded onto the hardwood floor, the sound exploding in the sacred silence of the library. It wasn't a noise, it was a violation. It was like a gunshot in a church. In the ringing silence that followed, I saw exactly what I had hoped for. Every head on the second floor snapped toward the sound, including the man in the windbreaker. His focus, for one critical second, was broken. His head turned toward the mess of fallen books, his body tensing in surprise. That was all I needed. I didn't run. I moved. Fast, low, and quiet. I darted away from him, down the long aisle, my rubber-soled shoes making no sound on the floor. I could hear a librarian's sharp, "What on earth was that?" from downstairs. I heard a chair scrape as someone stood up. The diversion was working, drawing the attention of the entire building. I reached the end of the stacks and burst into the open study area. My eyes frantically scanned the walls. No staircase, just more tables and windows. My heart sank. Was it a dead end? Then I saw it, tucked away in a corner, almost hidden behind a potted plant. A small metal door, marked with a single, blessed word, exit. I didn't hesitate. I sprinted the last 20 feet, my feigned composure abandoned. Behind me, I heard a sharp, sudden noise, the sound of the man realizing his mistake, the sound of the hunt beginning. I didn't look back. I grabbed the push bar on the emergency door and threw my full body weight against it. An alarm, high-pitched and deafening, began to shriek through the library. It was the sound of my escape. The door opened into a narrow, dark space that smelled of rust and cold concrete. A fire escape. The metal stairs clanged loudly under my feet as I scrambled down them, taking the steps 2 at a time. The alarm was still screaming behind me, a soundtrack to my frantic flight. I dropped the last few feet to the ground, landing hard in a dark, garbage-strewn alleyway behind the library. For a moment I just stood there, panting, my lungs burning, the cool night air a shock to my system. The alarm was slightly muffled now, but still insistent. I had the drive. I was out. A noise from above made me look up. In the illuminated rectangle of the emergency exit doorway, 2 stories up, a figure appeared. It was him, the man in the gray windbreaker. He wasn't rushing or shouting. He was just standing there, looking down at me, his face an unreadable silhouette against the light. Our eyes met across the distance. He slowly, almost imperceptibly, lifted a hand to his ear, touching an earpiece I hadn't seen before. He was reporting. Reporting that the target was out. Reporting that the package was on the move. He wasn't chasing me anymore. Because he didn't have to. The hunt had just changed phases. I was no longer a person of interest. I was a known target. A man on the run. A fresh wave of terror, colder and deeper than before, washed over me. I turned and sprinted down the dark alley, away from the screaming alarm and the silent man watching me from above, running toward a future that had suddenly become terrifyingly immediate. Running. My entire world had been reduced to the singular, primal act of putting one foot in front of the other. The library's alarm faded behind me, swallowed by the sounds of the city night. I didn't run toward the main streets, bright with streetlights and witnesses. I plunged deeper into the network of back alleys and service lanes that crisscrossed the town, a hidden geography I never knew existed. The familiar, charming town of Northwood, with its quaint storefronts and ocean breeze, had transformed into a hostile landscape of shadows and hiding places. Every passing headlight sent a jolt of panic through me. Every distant siren made the hairs on my neck stand up. The flash drive in my pocket felt like a burning coal, a tangible weight that was dragging me down into a world I was completely unprepared for. My mind was a chaotic whirlwind of fear. The man in the windbreaker. His calm demeanor. His earpiece. This wasn't some random thug. He was a professional. And if there was one, there were more. They knew who I was. They had my name, my photo, my address. My apartment was no longer a home. It was a trap. Going back, there was a death sentence. Blackwood Creek Asylum, my place of work, was just as compromised. Going there would endanger my colleagues and my patients. I thought of Ben, and a wave of guilt and fear washed over me. I couldn't go to him. I couldn't lead them to his door. In the space of a few hours, I had become an island, completely and utterly alone. I needed a place to stop, a place to think. A place where I wouldn't be Dr. Aris Thorne. On the far edge of town, where the coastal highway began its stretch toward the city, was a string of cheap, forgotten motels. The kind of places with flickering neon signs and names like the Sea Spray Inn that promised a charm they couldn't possibly deliver. They were anonymous. They were perfect. I chose the one that looked the most neglected, its sign missing a few letters, so it simply read EASPAYNN. I pulled the hood of my jacket up, kept my head down, and walked into the small, stuffy office. The night clerk, a teenager engrossed in his phone, barely glanced at me. I paid for one night in cash, using a false name, James Peterson, that popped into my head. He slid a physical key across the counter, and that was it. No ID, no credit card, no questions asked. I was a ghost. Room 12 was at the far end of the second-floor balcony. It smelled of stale cigarette smoke and bleach. The carpet was thin, the bedspread was a faded floral pattern, and a single dim lamp cast a sickly yellow glow over everything. It was grim. It was perfect. I locked the door, slid the chain across, and jammed the room's only chair under the knob. I pulled the grimy curtains shut, plunging the room into near total darkness. Only then did I let myself slide down the door, my back pressed against the wood, and finally breathe. The adrenaline began to recede, leaving behind a bone-deep exhaustion and a tremor in my hands that I couldn't control. I was a fugitive. The thought was so absurd, so alien, that I almost laughed. 48 hours ago, my biggest concern was writing up patient assessments. Now I was hiding in a motel under a fake name, hunted by shadowy figures for a secret I didn't even understand yet. I reached into my pocket and pulled out the flash drive. In the dim light from the crack in the curtains, the small black rectangle seemed to absorb the darkness around it. It was the cause of all this. It held Michael Chen's last words, his final warning. It was the key. I had to know what was on it. My first impulse was to pull out my own laptop, but I stopped myself. My laptop, my phone, they were a part of my life, my digital footprint. If the people hunting me were as sophisticated as Jacob implied, my devices were a liability. They could be tracked, monitored, remotely accessed. Plugging the drive into my own computer would be like sending up a flare. The realization hit me with a new kind of dread. I was not equipped for this. I was a psychiatrist, not a spy. I needed a clean machine. A new device, one that had no connection to Aris Thorne. Something I could buy with cash and discard if necessary. A burner laptop. I sat there in the dark, the grimy motel room, my new headquarters. The fear was still a living thing inside me, a cold knot in my stomach. But now, something else was beginning to grow alongside it, anger. A cold, quiet rage. These people, whoever they were, had murdered a man. They had invaded my life, turned my world upside down, and were now hunting me like an animal. They thought I was just a doctor, a civilian who would be easily scared, easily silenced. I was scared, that much was true. But I wasn't going to be silenced. A plan, fragile but essential, began to form. I was done running. It was time to fight back. And the only weapon I had was the information on this drive. My next mission was clear. I needed to get a new laptop. I needed to access those files. And I needed to show them that they had picked the wrong man to hunt. I crept to the window and peeled back a tiny corner of the curtain. The motel parking lot was mostly empty, lit by the buzzing, broken neon sign. Headlights from the highway swept past in a steady stream. Any one of them could be searching for me. The feeling of being prey was overwhelming. But as I clutched the flash drive in my hand, I made a silent vow. I would not be the prey for long. I would become the hunter. The first hour in that motel room was the longest of my life. I didn't move from my position on the floor, my back pressed against the door, listening. Every creak of the building, every distant shout from the highway, every footstep on the balcony outside was a potential threat. My psychiatrist's mind was a liability, analyzing every sound, creating worst-case scenarios. I was a textbook case of hypervigilance, a soldier listening for snapping twigs in enemy territory. The difference was, my war had been declared less than an hour ago, and my enemy was invisible. Sleep was impossible, but exhaustion was a physical weight, pressing me down. I knew I couldn't stay in this room forever. It was a temporary refuge, a pause button in a situation that was moving at terrifying speed. I had the key, the flash drive, but it was useless without a lock to put it in. I needed a computer. The plan was simple, born of desperation. I had to go back out. Not now, when the adrenaline of my escape might still have them actively searching the immediate area, but later, in the dead of night, when the town was asleep. The hours between 2 and 4 in the morning are a void, a time when the world belongs only to the sleepless and the hunters. I finally pushed myself up from the floor and began to prepare. I was no spy, but I knew I couldn't go out looking like Dr. Aris Thorne. My reflection in the bathroom's cracked mirror showed a man with wild eyes and a pale, drawn face. I splashed cold water on my face and looked at my options. My resources were pitiful. In the trunk of my car, I had a small emergency kit. In it was a faded generic baseball cap from some long-forgotten conference. I put it on, pulling the brim down low to shadow my face. I took off my distinctive tweed jacket and was left with a simple dark sweater. It wasn't much of a disguise, but it broke the silhouette of the man who had walked into the library. I did a quick inventory. I had about $400 in cash in my wallet. My phone was a tracking device. I powered it completely off and wrapped it in a piece of aluminum foil from a leftover takeout container I found in the motel's trash bin, a desperate, probably useless, attempt to block its signal. My car was a risk, too, but it was my only way to cover any distance. At 2:30 a.m., I decided it was time. The motel parking lot was still and quiet as I slipped out of my room and crept to my car. Every shadow seemed to hold a human shape. The drive was the most nerve-wracking experience of my life. I stayed under the speed limit, stopped for a full 3 seconds at every stop sign, and did everything I could to appear like a normal, law-abiding citizen. But my eyes were constantly flicking to my rearview mirror. Every pair of headlights behind me was them. The dark sedan 2 cars back, the pickup truck that took the same turn I did, they were all suspects. My own town had become a maze of potential ambushes. My destination was a massive, 24-hour superstore on the commercial strip just off the highway. Its vast, brightly lit interior was an oasis of anonymous consumerism. At this hour, it was a surreal landscape populated only by a skeleton crew of night stalkers and a few other sleepless souls. The emptiness that would have seemed eerie before now felt like a blessing. Fewer witnesses. Fewer threats. I walked in, grabbed a shopping cart for effect, and made my way toward the electronics department. The aisles were canyons of brightly packaged goods. I felt a pang of nostalgia for the simple, mundane world they represented. A world where a man's biggest decision at 3 a.m. might be what brand of cereal to buy. The electronics section was deserted. A wall of televisions played a silent, looping demo of a tropical paradise. I found what I was looking for, a display of cheap, off-brand laptops. I didn't need power or features. I needed a blank slate. I chose the cheapest one they had, a flimsy plastic thing that cost $250. To avoid the single open checkout lane and its cashier, I went to the self-checkout area. The machine's robotic voice felt unnervingly loud in the quiet store. I fed my cash into the slot, my eyes scanning the store around me. A security guard stood near the main entrance, looking bored. A stalker was unloading a pallet of dog food 2 aisles over. No one was paying me any attention. For the first time all night, I felt a flicker of hope. Maybe I could do this. Maybe I had gotten away clean. I bagged the laptop and walked toward the exit, my pace quickening. I pushed through the automatic doors and into the cool, dark air of the parking lot. The hope I'd felt inside evaporated under the vast, starry sky. The lot felt huge and exposed. My car was 100 yards away. As I started walking, a car turned into the entrance of the parking lot, its headlights sweeping across the asphalt. It was a dark, late-model sedan. The kind of generic, official-looking car that could be anything, but tonight, it could only be one thing. It drove slowly, not toward the store's entrance, but cruising the parking aisles, as if looking for someone. My heart leaped into my throat. I ducked behind a large SUV, my back pressing against the cold metal. The sedan continued its slow patrol. Was it them? Or just a security patrol? Or someone looking for a late-night parking spot? My mind couldn't tell the difference between caution and paranoia anymore. The sedan passed my aisle. I watched it go, my breath held tight in my chest. Then, it stopped, a few rows over. A man got out. He wasn't the man from the library, but he had the same build, the same air of quiet professionalism. He stood by his car, his head on a swivel, scanning the lot. I didn't wait to find out if he was a late-night shopper. Clutching the bag with my new laptop, I scurried, crouched low, between the rows of parked cars, making my way to my own vehicle. I fumbled with the keys, my shaking hands making the simple task a monumental challenge. I got the door open, slid inside, and threw the bag onto the passenger seat. I started the car, the sound of the engine roaring to life feeling like a betrayal. I pulled out of the parking spot, my eyes locked on my rearview mirror. The man was still there, a dark shape standing by his car. He was looking in my direction. I couldn't be sure he'd seen me, but I wasn't taking any chances. I drove out of the parking lot, turning in the opposite direction from my motel, and merged onto the dark, empty highway. I had the tool I needed, but I think they knew it. The race back to safety, and to the truth locked on that drive, had just begun. The highway was a black ribbon unfurling into darkness. My knuckles were white on the steering wheel, and my eyes spent more time on the rearview mirror than on the road ahead. For 10 minutes, I drove aimlessly, a ghost in the sleeping arteries of the county. I took random exits, navigated sleepy residential streets with identical houses, and looped back on myself twice. I was looking for the dark sedan, for the phantom tail I was sure was there. But there was nothing. No persistent headlights, no car matching my turns. The road behind me remained empty. Slowly, painfully, I allowed myself to believe I had gotten away. The man in the parking lot had been a coincidence. Just a random shopper in the dead of night. My paranoia had painted him as a monster, but he was just a man. The relief was so profound it felt like a physical illness, leaving me weak and trembling. The hunter was a figment of my imagination. For now. I circled back, taking the long way, and finally pulled into the parking lot of the Sea Spray Inn. The broken neon sign cast a flickering, sickly glow on the asphalt. The motel seemed to have sunk deeper into its own decay in the hours I'd been gone. I grabbed the bag containing the laptop, and with one last sweeping look at the empty lot, I hurried back to the grim sanctuary of room 12. Inside, with the door locked, chained, and barricaded, I leaned against it, listening to my own ragged breathing. The room was just as I'd left it, cold, dark, and anonymous. It was the safest place I had in the world. I placed the plastic bag on the small, wobbly table, and for a moment, I just stared at it. It was a weapon. It was a key. It was my only way out of this. With deliberate movements, I unboxed the laptop. The act was so mundane it felt surreal. I peeled the protective plastic from the screen, plugged the power cord into the wall, and pressed the power button. The machine whirred to life with a cheap, tinny sound, and a generic logo appeared on the screen. It was a blank slate. No history, no connections, no Aris Thorne. The setup screen asked me to connect to a network. I ignored it. Jacob had warned me they were sophisticated. The first thing they would monitor would be local Wi-Fi networks, looking for any new device that came online near my last known location. This laptop had to remain an island, completely disconnected from the outside world. A closed system. My hands were surprisingly steady as I took the flash drive from my pocket. It had been my constant companion for hours, a secret I had protected with my life. Now it was time for it to give up its secrets to me. I slid the drive into the USB port. A small icon appeared on the screen a moment later. My heart hammered in my chest. This was it. I clicked open the drive. The folder contained only 2 files. My stomach tightened. One was a heavily encrypted zip folder, its icon a stark, locked padlock. It was labeled Data. The other was a simple text file named IF_found. My hope plummeted. A password. Of course, there was a password. Michael Chen was a careful man, a man who knew he was in danger. He wouldn't have left his life's work unprotected. I felt a surge of despair. To have come this far, to have run, hidden, and stolen, only to be stopped by a digital wall was a uniquely cruel twist of fate. I had the box, but I didn't have the key. My eyes fell on the other file. IF_found. It was a message. A final breadcrumb left by a dead man. I double-clicked it, and a plain text document opened, filling the screen. It wasn't a set of instructions. It wasn't the password. It was a single, cryptic sentence. They took my leg, but not my purpose. Chapter 41. The First Vow. I stared at the screen, my mind reeling. It was a clue. A riddle. It had to be the key to the password. They took my leg. It was a clear reference, a line that could have been spoken by the obsessed, vengeful Captain Ahab. Michael Chen hadn't just hidden his secret in a copy of Moby Dick. He had woven the book's very fabric into his last line of defense. Chapter 41. The First Vow. It had to be a pointer, a specific passage in the book. But I didn't have the book. I had left it on the shelf in the library, a place I could never return to. A wave of frustration washed over me. The answer was just out of reach, locked away in a public building guarded by my hunters. But then my memory, trained to recall details from patient sessions, began to work. I hadn't read the book, but I had seen it. I had held it. A library book. What do all library books have? I remembered the catalog computer, the call number, the details on the screen. There was more than just the title. There was publisher information, the edition. Maybe, just maybe, I could find the exact text online. But I couldn't use the internet. It was too risky. I sat back, the dim light of the laptop screen illuminating my face. The puzzle was laid out before me. The clue was on my screen, and the key was in a book I couldn't reach. Michael Chen had created one final, brilliant lock, and I was trapped with it in a dark motel room, with a hunter somewhere outside, and the first light of dawn still hours away. The race wasn't over. It had just become a battle of wits. The laptop screen glowed in the darkness, the words of the riddle mocking me. Chapter 41. The First Vow. The answer was so close, yet it was locked in a book I couldn't reach, on an internet I couldn't access. For a long time, I just sat there, trapped in the dingy motel room, the walls feeling closer than ever. My mind, trained to find patterns and solve puzzles of the psyche, began to attack the problem. Michael Chen was a man of logic, an engineer. But he was also a man who appreciated literature, who chose a classic novel as his final hiding place. The password wouldn't be random. It would be meaningful. The first vow was the key. It had to be a specific word or phrase from that chapter. But which one? I tried to imagine the text. Was it a single word? A sentence? I tried typing a few obvious guesses into the password field. Ahab. Incorrect password. Heckwad. Incorrect password. Moby Dick. Incorrect password. With each failure, a small window of hope closed. I was guessing blindly, and it was getting me nowhere. I had no choice. It was a terrible, desperate risk, but it was the only move I had left. I had to go online. The motel's Wi-Fi was out of the question. It would be a digital flare, announcing my exact location. I needed anonymity. I needed a public network, far from here, with enough traffic to hopefully mask my presence. It meant going back out into the world, back into the territory of the hunters. And this time, it would be dawn. The first hint of gray light was beginning to silhouette the edges of the cheap curtains. The darkness, my ally, was retreating. I redonned my flimsy disguise, the hat pulled low, and slipped out of the room. The air was cool and damp with morning fog, clinging to the coastline. The world was waking up, and my time for hiding was running out. I drove not toward the town center, but toward the commercial outskirts, my new laptop on the passenger seat. I was on a new kind of hunt, scanning the list of available Wi-Fi networks on the screen as I drove slowly past strip malls and closed businesses. Most were secured. Linksys_private, Smith_family_network, Netgear_secure. Then I saw it. I was passing a 24-hour coffee shop, a beacon of light in the pre-dawn gloom. Its network was called Guest_Brew. It was open, unsecured. I didn't go in. Instead, I parked across the street in the shadowed lot of a closed auto parts store, far enough away to hopefully be ignored, but close enough to get a strong signal. The risks were enormous. The coffee shop was a public place. My pursuers could be watching it. My car, my face, they could be seen by anyone. But I had to believe they wouldn't expect me to be this brazen. I connected to the network. My laptop, which had been an isolated island, was now part of the vast, global ocean of the internet. A timer started in my head. Every second I was connected, I was leaving a trace. I had to be fast. I bypassed my usual browser and used a pre-installed generic one. I didn't go to Google. I typed in the address for DuckDuckGo, a search engine that promised not to track its users. A small, meaningless gesture of security, but it made me feel slightly less exposed. My fingers flew across the keyboard. Moby Dick Chapter 41 full text. The search results were instantaneous. I clicked the first link, a university's public domain literature archive. The page loaded, and there it was. Chapter 41, Moby Dick. I scrolled down, my eyes scanning the text with the frantic intensity of a scholar who had just found a lost manuscript. The chapter was a blaze of fury and obsession. It was Captain Ahab's demonic sermon on the quarterdeck, where he nails a Spanish gold doubloon to the mast as a reward for the man who first spots the white whale. He works the crew into a frenzy, making them all share in his mad quest for vengeance. I read his words, his powerful, blasphemous promises. And then I saw it. The vow. Ahab has the harpooneers cross their lances, and he makes the crew drink from the sockets of their harpoons. He makes them swear an oath. And as they drink, he cries out the words of their shared damnation and purpose. It was a powerful, unforgettable phrase. God hunt us all, if we do not hunt Moby Dick to his death. God hunt us all. It felt right. It was a perfect password. It was a prayer and a curse. It spoke of obsession, of being hunted, of a purpose beyond reason. It was Michael Chen's final, poetic message. My hands were shaking again. I disconnected from the Wi-Fi, severing my connection to the outside world. The whole process had taken less than 90 seconds. I drove away from the coffee shop, not back to my motel, but to a secluded public park overlooking the ocean, the sky now a soft, bruised purple. I sat in my car, the waves crashing on the shore below, and opened the encrypted folder again. The password prompt appeared. With a strange sense of reverence, I typed it in, all one word, all lowercase, as an engineer might. God hunt us all. I pressed enter. For a heartbeat, nothing happened. The laptop seemed to be thinking, the cursor a blinking, silent judge. I held my breath, every fiber of my being focused on that tiny line on the screen. And then, with a soft click, the password window vanished. It was replaced by a new window, revealing the contents of the folder. It hadn't been a single file. It was dozens. Blueprints, technical schematics, internal emails, video logs. It was a treasure trove of data. The lock was broken. The secrets of Michael Chen were open before me. The decryption window vanished, replaced by a stark, white window filled with a list of files. There were at least 50 of them, their names a cryptic shorthand of an engineer's mind. grid_sim_failure_04.mov, fw_report_final PDF, core_bartonam, APS_contract threadline.pdf. My exhaustion was momentarily forgotten, replaced by a thrumming, nervous energy. I was looking at a dead man's life's work. The work that had cost him his life. I didn't know where to begin. The technical documents and spreadsheets would be dense, incomprehensible to me. My eyes scanned the list for something human, something I could immediately grasp. I found it in the file labeled grid_sim_failure_04.mov. A video file. I clicked on it. The screen filled with a complex diagram of the Northern California power grid, a web of lines and nodes. A moment later, a voice began to speak, and a chill went down my spine. It was Michael Chen. His voice was calm, professional, the voice of a brilliant teacher. "This is the fourth simulation of the Aethelred exploit," he said, as his cursor moved across the screen, highlighting a section of the grid. "The vulnerability isn't in the hardware, it's in the management software. Aethelred Power Solutions sold it to the state as the most secure system on the market. They lied." I watched, mesmerized, as Chen demonstrated the exploit. He typed a single line of code into a command prompt. On the simulation, a small node in the grid turned from green to red. "That's it," Chen's voice continued, now tight with a controlled anger. "The backdoor. Once it's activated, it creates a cascading failure. But it's the second stage of the virus that's the real monster. It doesn't just shut down the grid, it simultaneously attacks the diagnostic and reboot systems. It tells the engineers that everything is fine, while bricking the very hardware meant to bring the system back online." On the screen, the red began to spread like a disease, moving from node to node until the entire grid was a sea of crimson. "The official estimate for a catastrophic grid failure is a week for recovery," Chen said, his voice grim. "My simulation shows that with the Aethelred exploit, we're not talking about a week. We're talking about a minimum of a month. Maybe 2. No power. No communications. No water treatment. No banking. A metropolitan area of 9 million people sent back to the Dark Ages. It's the perfect, untraceable weapon." The video ended. I sat in stunned silence, the sound of the ocean waves outside my car a distant, meaningless whisper. This was the storm Jacob had warned me about. A man-made apocalypse, engineered for profit by a company called Aethelred Power Solutions. I needed to know more about the human element. Who knew? Who was responsible? My eyes went to the file named corinth.barton.ml, an email file. I opened it. It was a long, painful thread between Michael Chen and his direct superior, a man named Robert Barton. I read through the emails, my anger growing with every line. The first emails were from Chen, professional and urgent, detailing his initial findings. Barton's replies were dismissive, telling him it was a theoretical bug, a non-issue. As Chen provided more proof, including the simulations, Barton's tone shifted from dismissive to hostile. "Your job is to implement the system, not question it," one email read. The final email from Barton was a clear, unambiguous threat. "Drop this, Mike. This is your only warning. Some things are above your pay grade." Chen's final reply, sent only a day before his death, was defiant. He said he was taking his evidence to a reporter at the San Francisco Chronicle, and he named the company responsible. "I know Aethelred Power Solutions is behind this, and I will not be part of a cover-up." Aethelred Power Solutions. The name felt like a death sentence. They were the they. They were the ones who had sent the man in the windbreaker. They were the ones who had killed Michael Chen. I scanned the list of files again, and my eyes landed on one I had overlooked, APS_members.html. It was a saved web page. My curiosity piqued. I clicked it. A simple web page loaded, displaying the corporate leadership for Aethelred. Chairman of the board. CEO. Chief Financial Officer. The names were meaningless to me. I scrolled down the list of board members, my eyes glazing over the unfamiliar names and smiling corporate headshots. And then I stopped. My heart didn't just stop, it felt like it was ripped out of my chest. Near the bottom of the list was a name I knew. A name I trusted. A face I saw almost every day. It was a man I respected, a man who had been my mentor, a man who had personally assigned me to the patient in Ward 7. Dr. Jonathan Evans. My supervisor. The calm, paternal director of Blackwood Creek Asylum. The world tilted on its axis. The motel room, the laptop, the ocean outside, it all dissolved into a haze of static. Evans. My mind raced, recontextualizing every conversation, every interaction, in a new, horrifying light. Why was Jacob transferred to Blackwood? Because Evans, a board member of the company Jacob's knowledge threatened, wanted him contained. Why was I, a junior doctor, assigned such a high-profile case? Because Evans knew my reputation. He knew I was a man of science, a man who would diagnose, dismiss, and medicate the delusion into oblivion. My objectivity wasn't an asset, it was a tool he had intended to use. His words from yesterday echoed in my ears, no longer a professional courtesy but a thinly veiled threat. Your objectivity is more crucial now than ever. He wasn't telling me to be a good doctor. He was warning me not to believe. The conspiracy wasn't some shadowy, faceless organization. The heart of it, the center of the web, was a man I worked for. The asylum wasn't a place I had escaped from. It was the enemy's headquarters. And Dr. Evans, my calm, rational, reassuring boss, was the monster at the center of the maze. I was completely, utterly trapped. The sun was beginning to rise, painting the fog-shrouded Pacific in strokes of pale orange and pink. It was the start of a new day, a day that felt like the end of the world. I sat in my car, the laptop screen still glowing with Dr. Evans's smiling, corporate photo, and felt a paralysis colder and deeper than any fear I had yet experienced. It was the paralysis of absolute checkmate. Every escape route I could have imagined was a dead end. My home was compromised. My friend Ben was endangered. The police were a gamble I couldn't afford to take against a multi-billion-dollar corporation like Aethelred. And now, the asylum, the one place that represented my career, my identity, and a strange sort of safety, was revealed to be the enemy's command center. I wasn't a man on the run from a shadowy organization anymore. I was a lone soldier trapped behind the front lines, and the enemy general was a man who knew my name, my background, and every one of my psychological weaknesses. A horrifying thought solidified in my mind. I finally understood the true, diabolical genius of Evans's plan. He hadn't just wanted to contain Jacob, he had set a trap. If I, against all odds, had started to believe Jacob's story and gone to my supervisor with my concerns, what would have happened? Evans would have listened with that calm, paternal concern of his. He would have asked me gentle questions, taken notes, and then he would have professionally and systematically destroyed me. He would have diagnosed me with a shared psychotic disorder, folie à deux. He would have painted me as a brilliant but unstable doctor who had succumbed to the powerful delusion of a charismatic patient. My warnings would have been dismissed as symptoms. My evidence would have been reframed as part of my own psychosis. He wouldn't have had me killed. He would have had me committed. I would have become a patient in my own asylum, screaming a truth that everyone would be professionally obligated to ignore. My blood ran cold. The man in the gray windbreaker wasn't Plan A. He was the cleanup crew. I was never meant to get out of the library. I was meant to fail, to be scared, and to run right back to Dr. Evans, who would have caught me in a web of psychiatric diagnosis from which there was no escape. But something had gone wrong with his plan. Two things, actually. The first was Jacob. Why had Jacob chosen me? Did he know about Evans? Did he intentionally place his warning in the hands of the enemy's employee? It seemed impossibly risky. Or was my assignment to him a variable he hadn't predicted, a complication he was forced to navigate? His motives, his endgame, were still a complete mystery. The second thing that had gone wrong with Evans's plan was me. He had profiled me as a man of pure, rigid logic. A man who would never break protocol, never lie to an old friend, never create a diversion in a public library. He had underestimated how the impossible truth, once witnessed, could shatter a man's entire worldview and force him to act in ways he never thought he could. The paralysis began to recede, replaced by the slow, burning fire of pure rage. I was not a pawn to be sacrificed. I was not a patient to be diagnosed. I had the truth right here, on this cheap plastic laptop. The files were my only weapon, my only shield. But they were useless if I was dead or locked away in a padded room. Hiding was no longer an option. Sooner or later, they would find me. My car, my face on some security camera, it was only a matter of time. Running was just a slow-motion surrender. There was only one path forward, and it was the most insane, suicidal option imaginable. I had to go back. Not as a doctor, not as an employee, but as an infiltrator. The conspiracy began at Blackwood. The answers I needed had to be there, too. And at the center of it all was Jacob. He was the one person on this planet who understood the full scope of the game we were playing. He had sent me on this path for a reason. I had retrieved the data, just as he intended. Now I needed to know the next step. What was his plan? What were we supposed to do with this information? My gaze drifted from the ocean to the coastal hills, now golden in the morning light. Somewhere, nestled among the cypress trees, was Blackwood Creek Asylum. It stood there not as a place of healing, but as a fortress. Evans's fortress. The man in the windbreaker was the enemy's soldier on the outside. But who was on the inside? How many of the staff, the nurses, the orderlies, the security guards, were loyal to Evans? Was Nurse Miller a weary veteran of the ward, or a watchful warden? I had to assume I could trust no one. The task was impossible. I had to find a way back inside a high-security psychiatric hospital, bypass a staff that might be actively working against me, and get to the most secure ward to speak with a patient who was, for all intents and purposes, the enemy's most valuable prisoner. It was madness. It was suicide. It was the only way. The sun was fully up now, glinting off the asylum's windows in the distance. I started the car, the laptop with its world-shattering secrets on the seat beside me. I wasn't running from the asylum anymore. I was driving toward it. I was going back into the lion's den. And this time, I knew who the lion was. Driving directly up to the gates of Blackwood Creek was out of the question. My employee ID card, which I could feel in my wallet, was no longer a key but a tracking device waiting to be activated. My face would be flagged the second it appeared on a security camera. To approach the asylum was to approach a fortress, and I was no soldier. I was a psychiatrist. My weapons were observation and analysis, not force. I found a small, unpaved fire road on the hill opposite the asylum, a place I knew from occasional morning jogs. It was overgrown and forgotten, offering a perfect, concealed vantage point. I parked the car under the cover of a dense cluster of cypress trees and got out. Through the morning mist, the asylum spread out below me like a map. I could see the main building, the manicured courtyards, the staff parking lot, and in the back, the less scenic but far more interesting service areas. From my perch, I watched the life of the institution begin. It was a routine I knew by heart, but seeing it from this perspective, as an outsider and an enemy, made it all seem sinister. I watched the 7 a.m. shift change. I saw nurses and orderlies I knew by name walking from their cars, coffee in hand, completely oblivious to the conspiracy that was unfolding under their own roof. I saw the security guards making their rounds, their paths predictable and efficient. There didn't seem to be any heightened state of alert, no extra guards. To the world, it was just another Thursday at Blackwood. This was good. It meant Evans didn't know I had the data. Not yet. He likely assumed I was either dead or in hiding, a terrified man on the run. He wouldn't expect me to come back. My only chance of getting inside was to exploit the mundane, to hide in plain sight within the daily clockwork of the asylum's operations. My eyes were drawn to the service entrance at the rear of the main building, near the kitchens. It was a place of constant, controlled chaos, deliveries coming in, garbage going out, kitchen staff taking smoke breaks. It was the asylum's weakest point. A plan began to form, a fragile, desperate blueprint. I knew from my time on the staff meal planning committee that the main produce delivery arrived every morning between 8:30 and 9 a.m. It was a large truck from a farm in the valley. During the unloading, the large service gate was open, and the 2 regular security guards were often distracted, signing invoices or chatting with the driver. For about 15 minutes, the asylum's hardshell had a soft spot. That was my window. But first, I had to deal with the laptop. Taking it with me was unthinkable. If I was caught, the evidence would be captured along with me. Evans would have the drive, and the truth would be buried forever. But I couldn't leave it in the car, either. It was too easily found. I needed to hide it. I took the laptop, now my most precious and dangerous possession, and my jacket from the car. I walked deeper into the woods, off the fire road, until I found a large, fallen log covered in moss. Using a tire iron from my trunk, I dug a shallow hole in the soft, damp earth beneath it. I wrapped the laptop in my jacket to protect it from the moisture and placed it in the hole. I covered it with dirt and then carefully replaced the moss and leaves, doing my best to make it look undisturbed. It was a crude hiding place, but it would have to do. The act of separating myself from the evidence was terrifying. I was now walking into the lion's den completely unarmed. With the laptop secured, I made my way down the hill, moving carefully through the trees and brush until I was in a small grove of eucalyptus trees about 100 yards from the asylum service gate. I crouched behind a thicket of bushes and I waited. The sun was higher now, burning away the last of the mist. I could hear the clang of pots from the kitchen, the rumble of a distant lawnmower. At 8:47 a.m., I saw it. A large, white refrigerated truck rumbled up the service road and stopped before the gate. The gate slid open, and the truck backed into the loading bay. My heart began to pound against my ribs. This was it. The driver, a heavy-set man in a stained t-shirt, hopped out and was greeted by one of the kitchen porters. They started unloading crates of vegetables. The two security guards stood nearby, one holding a clipboard, the other laughing at something the driver said. Their attention was focused entirely on the delivery. No one was looking at the surrounding woods. No one was looking for a ghost from their own staff. This was my chance. My only chance. The window of opportunity was open, but it would close in minutes. I took a deep, steadying breath, the air cool in my lungs. I pushed myself up from my hiding place. I pulled the baseball cap down low, tucked my chin to my chest, and with a feigned confidence I did not feel, I stepped out from the cover of the trees. I began walking, not running, toward the open gate, my eyes fixed on a point just beyond the truck, trying to look like a man who belonged there, a man who was simply late for his shift. Every step felt like a mile. Every beat of my heart was a drum counting down to my discovery. The 100-yard walk from the tree line to the loading bay was the longest journey of my life. Every nerve in my body screamed at me to run, to hide, but I forced my legs into a steady, unhurried pace. I focused on the image of a tired employee, slightly late for his shift, his mind on his morning coffee. I belonged here. I belonged here. I repeated the mantra in my head until it was a dull rhythm beneath the frantic pounding of my heart. Halfway there, it happened. The security guard who had been laughing with the driver turned his head, his gaze sweeping casually over the service yard. For a horrifying fraction of a second, his eyes met mine. I didn't flinch. I gave a short, almost imperceptible nod, a gesture of weary familiarity, and kept walking, my face angled toward the ground. The brim of my cap was my only shield. I saw him pause, a flicker of puzzlement in his expression, before his attention was drawn back to the driver's loud joke. He dismissed me. I was just part of the background noise. I slipped past the back of the truck, the smell of diesel fumes and fresh lettuce filling my lungs, and crossed the threshold into the loading bay. I was in. The cool, sterile air of the asylum was a shock after the warmth of the morning sun. I was immediately plunged into the chaotic world of the kitchens. The roar of industrial dishwashers, the clang of metal pots, the shouts of the cooks. It was a sensory assault that provided perfect cover. No one gave me a second glance. I was just another body in the morning rush. I knew I couldn't stay there. I slipped through a set of swinging doors and into the labyrinth of service corridors that ran like veins through the asylum's bones. This was the building's hidden underworld, a place of humming generators, vast laundry rooms smelling of bleach, and dark, narrow tunnels housing pipes and electrical conduits. I had only been down here a few times in my 3 years at Blackwood, and now I navigated it like a rat in a maze, my memory of the asylum's blueprints my only guide. After 10 minutes of tense, silent walking, I found a narrow service staircase and made my way up. I emerged into a familiar, carpeted hallway. I was back in the main building, one floor below Ward 7. The silence up here was more dangerous than the noise of the kitchens. I moved quickly, sticking close to the walls, my ears straining for the sound of footsteps. I reached the corridor that led to Ward 7. It was exactly as I remembered, sterile, white, and empty. At the far end was the heavy, reinforced door, the final barrier between me and Jacob. And it was an impossible barrier. It was controlled by a high-level electronic lock. My own keycard, even if it wasn't flagged, never had access. Only senior staff like Dr. Evans and the dedicated Ward 7 personnel could open it. I couldn't force it. I couldn't trick it. I had to wait for it to be opened for me. I scouted the area and found my hiding place, a small janitorial closet directly opposite the ward entrance. I slipped inside, the smell of ammonia and old mops a strange comfort. I left the door cracked just enough to give me a sliver of a view of the heavy gray door. And I waited. Minutes stretched into an eternity. Twice, my heart leaped as I heard footsteps, but they belonged to a junior nurse who walked past without stopping. My body was coiled like a spring, every muscle tensed. This was the most vulnerable part of my plan. I was a sitting duck. Then, I heard a familiar, rhythmic squeaking. It was the sound of a medication cart. I peered through the crack in the door and saw her. Nurse Brenda Miller. She was pushing the cart down the hall, her expression as stern and steady as ever. She was the gatekeeper. She was my only way in. My plan was simple and suicidally risky. She would have to use both hands to manage the cart as she went through the door. For a second or two, her attention would be divided. I would have to move from this closet, cross the 10 feet of open hallway, and slip through the door behind her before it could close and lock. If she saw me, if she screamed, it was over. I watched as she reached the door. She swiped her keycard with one hand. The panel beeped. Then she entered the 6-digit code on the keypad. A loud metallic clunk echoed in the silent hall as the magnetic lock disengaged. She pushed the heavy door inward and began to maneuver her cart through the opening. Her back was to me. No. It was now or never. I pushed the closet door open and launched myself across the hall. I wasn't running, but it was the fastest, most silent walk of my life. 3 steps. 4. The door was already beginning to swing shut behind her. I was 2 feet away. She was inside, her attention on parking the cart. I didn't breathe. I flattened myself, turned sideways, and slid through the narrowing gap. The heavy door clicked shut behind me, the magnetic lock engaging with another loud clunk. The sound sealed my fate. I was inside Ward 7. I was in the enemy's inner sanctum. I slowly straightened up, my back pressed against the cold steel of the door, and my eyes met the stunned, disbelieving gaze of Nurse Miller. She stood 10 feet away, her hand frozen over a tray of medication, her mouth slightly agape. She hadn't screamed. She was just staring at me, her mind clearly struggling to process the impossible sight of Dr. Aris Thorne appearing out of thin air in her locked, secure ward. Her expression held 1,000 questions, but the most important one was the one I saw deepest in her eyes. Was she friend, or was she foe? The silence in the hallway of Ward 7 was absolute. For a full 5 seconds, Nurse Miller and I stood frozen, 2 characters in a drama that had no script. I could see the war in her eyes. Her training, her decades of service, every rule she had ever followed screamed at her to press the red panic button on the wall beside her, to summon security, to neutralize the threat. But her eyes, the eyes of a woman who had seen every form of human madness, told a different story. They held the memory of a falling tree, of an impossible prediction that had come true. She knew this was different. I broke the silence, my voice a low, urgent whisper. Brenda, please, don't make a sound. I'm not here to cause trouble. I just need to talk to him. Her eyes narrowed. Dr. Thorne, you've lost your mind. You're an unauthorized presence in a high-security ward. I have to report this. Her words were automatic, the recitation of protocol, but her hand didn't move toward the alarm. You know what happened 2 days ago, I pressed, taking a half-step closer. You were there. You heard me tell you his prediction, and you saw it happen, down to the minute. Was that madness, Brenda? Or was it something else? She flinched. The memory was still raw. A coincidence, she whispered, but her voice lacked conviction. It wasn't, I said. And things are happening, dangerous things, because of what he knows. I'm trying to stop them, but I can't do it without him. I looked past her, down the short hallway toward room 713. I am asking you not as a doctor, but as a person, to give me 5 minutes. That's all I need. 5 minutes. She stared at me, her face a mask of conflict. She was a guardian of order, and I was asking her to embrace chaos. She looked down at her medication cart, then back at me. I saw her resolve crumble, replaced by a weary, reluctant acceptance of the impossible. She let out a slow, quiet breath. Dr. Evans is making his morning rounds. He'll be here in 10 minutes, she said, her voice flat, devoid of emotion. You have until then. If you are not gone when he arrives, I will say I found you here and sounded the alarm myself. Do you understand? It wasn't an offer of help. It was a stay of execution. I understand, I said, a wave of gratitude washing over me. Thank you, Brenda. She gave a curt, sharp shake of her head and turned her back to me, beginning to dispense medications into small paper cups, her movements rigid and deliberate. She had given me my window. I didn't waste a second of it. I moved quickly down the hall and entered Jacob's room, closing the door softly behind me. He was sitting in the chair by the window, not looking out at the sky, but at the door, as if he had been listening to the entire exchange. There was no surprise on his face, only a calm, patient expectation. There was no time for introductions. The words spilled out of me in a frantic, whispered rush. I got it. The drive. I opened it. I saw the simulations, the emails. I know about Aethelred Power Solutions, and I know about Evans. He's on their board, Jacob. He's been controlling this from the beginning. He brought you here to bury you, and he assigned me to the case to discredit your story. It was all a setup. Jacob simply nodded, his expression unchanged. Yes. Dr. Evans is a man who believes he is containing a fire. He doesn't realize he is standing in a puddle of gasoline. The man in the library, the one at the superstore, they're his people, aren't they? They are Aethelred's people, Jacob corrected gently. Their security division. Dr. Evans provides the strategy. They provide the muscle. They are likely searching for you now, which is why you had to come back here. What do we do? I demanded, the desperation rising in my voice. The clock is ticking. Nurse Miller gave me 10 minutes at most. I have all the proof, but we're trapped in the most secure part of an asylum run by the man we're trying to expose. We have nowhere to go. Who said we need to go anywhere? Jacob replied, a faint, almost imperceptible smile touching his lips. He stood up and walked to the wall opposite his bed. He ran his hand along the smooth, painted surface. Dr. Evans is a brilliant strategist, but he is a man of the present. His knowledge is limited. He doesn't know the history of this building. He stopped at a specific spot on the wall. When this ward was built during the height of the Cold War, it was designed as a secure location for government officials in the event of a national emergency. The psychiatric ward was just a cover. They installed a direct, hardwired communication line, completely independent of the hospital's network. A fail-safe. It connects to the state's emergency alert system. My mind struggled to comprehend his words. You're saying there's a direct line out of here? One that Evans doesn't know about. It's ancient technology, Jacob said. Obsolete. Forgotten. It's hidden behind a panel in the ward's main maintenance closet. He turned to face me, and his eyes, for the first time, held a spark of something other than weariness. It was the glint of a checkmate. I have spent my time here doing more than just talking to you, Doctor. I have been observing. The access code for that closet is changed weekly. This week's code is 8-4-1-9-9-2. He had a plan. He had a plan all along. He had sent me out not just to retrieve the data, but to bring it back here, to the one place with a secret exit door to the rest of the world. We can upload the files, I whispered, the audacity of it taking my breath away. We can send the proof to every news station, every government agency in the state, all at once. Yes, Jacob said. The storm Michael Chen tried to prevent is about to break. But now, it will break on them. He looked toward the door. Your time is almost up, Doctor. You have the drive. I have given you the key. You know what you have to do. Just then, I heard it. The sound of distinct, confident footsteps approaching in the main hallway outside. It was a walk I knew well. It was Dr. Evans. My 10 minutes were gone, and the final move of the game was about to be played. The sound of Dr. Evans's footsteps in the hallway was the sound of a closing door, the sound of my time running out. Panic flared in my chest, hot and sharp. I was trapped. He cannot see you, Jacob said, his voice a steady, calming anchor in my storm of fear. Your only objective is the terminal in the maintenance closet. I will be the diversion. Go now. There was no time to question, no time to think. I pulled the flash drive from my pocket, clutching it in my hand. I gave Jacob one last look, a look of terrified, grateful understanding, and slipped out of his room. The short, sterile hallway of Ward 7 felt a mile long. To my left was the main entrance, where Dr. Evans would appear at any second. To my right, halfway down, was a small, unmarked door, the maintenance closet. I moved toward it, my body low, every step a silent prayer. I heard Evans's voice, clear and professionally pleasant, from the main corridor. Brenda. Good morning. Everything in order. Doctor, Nurse Miller replied, her voice impressively steady. Just finishing the morning medication run. I reached the closet door as Evans's shadow fell across the entrance to the ward. I didn't dare look. My fingers, slick with sweat, fumbled on the keypad. 8-4-1-9-9-2, the numbers Jacob had given me. I pressed the last digit. A soft click echoed in the hallway, a sound as loud as a gunshot to my ears. I pulled the handle, slipped into the cramped darkness of the closet, and pulled the door shut just as I heard Evans's footsteps stop outside Jacob's room. The closet was tiny, smelling of dust and old electrical wiring. I fumbled for my phone, turning it on for the first time in what felt like a lifetime, using its screen as a dim flashlight. The back of the closet was just as Jacob had described. Behind a row of cleaning supplies was a gray metal panel. I pried it open. There, mounted on the wall, was a relic. An old computer terminal with a small, green-on-black monochrome screen and a heavy, clunky keyboard. A single green cursor blinked expectantly. It was alive. From the hallway, I could hear the muffled sound of voices. Evans had entered Jacob's room. Jacob, Evans's voice was smooth as silk, but I could hear the steel beneath it. You've had a busy few days. Time is a relative concept, Doctor, Jacob's voice replied, calm and even. I ignored them, my attention focused on the task at hand. I found a USB port on the side of the ancient machine. It seemed absurdly modern on such an old device, likely a later modification. I plugged in the flash drive. The green screen flickered, and new text appeared //accessing external drive. Where is he, Jacob? Evans's voice was sharper now. Where is Dr. Thorne? He's where he needs to be, Jacob answered cryptically, following the path that was laid out for him. I typed in the command I saw on the screen, list_files. A directory of Michael Chen's data appeared, a cascade of green text. The next command was initiate for broadcast. I typed it in. A new prompt appeared, select_files and upload. // warning. Broadcast is final and irreversible. Stop playing games. Evans's voice was no longer calm. It was a snarl. He was here. I know he was here. What did you tell him? I typed select_all and hit enter. The final prompt appeared on screen. Confirm_broadcast? Y/N. This was it. The point of no return. I could hear a scuffle from the room next door, the sound of a chair being knocked over. Evans's patience had finally broken. Security to Ward 7, he roared, his voice now echoing clearly in the hall. Lock down this ward. Find Dr. Thorne. Now. I pressed Y and slammed the enter key. The green screen changed. At the bottom, a progress bar appeared, made of simple block characters. Uploading. ####. It was moving, but with agonizing slowness. 3 blocks. 4. The muffled sound of an alarm began to blare from the main corridor. I could hear running footsteps, shouts. They knew I was here. They were coming. The bar crept forward. ########. 50%. Check the closets. Check everywhere. Evans was screaming now, all professional composure gone, replaced by the raw fury of a king whose castle had been breached. I stared at the progress bar, my entire universe reduced to that slow crawl of green blocks. My breathing had stopped. The fate of everything, of Michael Chen's sacrifice, of Jacob's mission, of my own life, rested on the speed of this ancient machine. ############################################################################################################################################################################################################################################################################################################################################################################################### 80%. 90. The handle on the maintenance closet door began to rattle violently. Someone was trying to get in. It's locked, a voice shouted. Hashtag, 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 hashtag. 100%. The text on the screen flashed. Upload underscore complete. Broadcast underscore initiated. Connection underscore terminated. Break it down. Evans shrieked from the hallway. A heavy thud slammed against the door, making the whole wall shake. I looked at the screen, at the beautiful finality of the words broadcast for initiated. We had done it. The truth was out. The closet door splintered and burst open. Two large security guards in black uniforms stood there, their faces grim. And behind them, his face a mask of pure, unrestrained hatred, was Dr. Evans. His eyes locked on mine, then darted to the glowing green screen behind me. He saw the message. He understood. He had lost. Get him, he whispered, his voice a venomous hiss. And the world exploded into darkness. Consciousness returned not as a gentle dawn, but as a splitting headache and the dull, chemical taste of sedatives in my mouth. My first sensation was of coarse, unfamiliar fabric against my skin. My second was of a profound, leaden weakness in my limbs. I was lying on a narrow, hard mattress. I forced my eyes open. The world was a blur of sterile white. I was in one of the high-security observation rooms in Ward 7. I knew it instantly. The seamless white walls, the lack of any furniture besides the bolted-down bed, the small, shatterproof window in the heavy steel door. I was a prisoner. I tried to sit up, but a wave of dizziness forced me back down. My own clothes were gone, replaced by the simple gray scrubs of a patient. My wallet, my keys, my phone, all gone. The doctor had officially become the patient. The final, perfect irony of Dr. Evans's trap had snapped shut. But had I won? The question screamed in the silence of my mind. The last thing I remembered was the screen, broadcast underscore initiated. Had it worked? Or had they cut the power a second too late? Was the world outside right now receiving the truth? Or was I just a madman in a locked room, my final act of defiance a meaningless gesture against an ancient, forgotten machine? The not knowing was a more exquisite torture than any physical restraint. Time passed. An hour. 2. It was impossible to tell in the windowless, seamless room. Then, I heard the soft sound of shoes in the hallway. A keycard swiped. The lock on my door clicked open. Dr. Jonathan Evans stepped inside, closing the door behind him. The mask was gone. The calm, paternal mentor I had known was gone, replaced by a man I had never seen before. His face was pale, his lips a thin, tight line. His eyes, usually so placid and reassuring, were filled with a cold, bottomless rage. He didn't speak for a long moment, simply observing me with the detached curiosity of a biologist studying a specimen that had ruined his experiment. "Well, Aris," he finally said, his voice a low, chilling whisper. "You've been very, very busy." I pushed myself up, my back against the wall. "Did it work?" I asked, my own voice raspy. "Did it get out?" A flicker of something, annoyance? Fury, crossed his face before being suppressed. "Oh, it got out," he said with a dismissive wave of his hand. "A garbled data burst, sent over an archaic emergency network. It's causing a bit of a stir among some low-level state agencies. A curiosity. It's being dealt with. Do you have any idea the resources at Aethelred's disposal? The media contacts? The political leverage? You haven't started a revolution, Dr. Thorne. You've simply authored the final chapter of your own medical file." He took a step closer. "You see, you have it all wrong. You think you're a hero, a whistleblower, but you're just a child who found his father's handgun. You have no comprehension of the forces you're playing with. The blackout isn't an act of terrorism. It's a controlled burn, a necessary, painful reset to correct a system that is spiraling into chaos. It's surgery, and sometimes surgery requires cutting away the parts that are diseased." "You murdered Michael Chen," I spat. "Was he part of the disease?" "Mr. Chen was a complication," Evans replied, his voice devoid of any emotion. "He was a talented engineer who couldn't see the masterpiece for the screws and bolts. He had to be removed, just as you now have to be contained." He straightened his tie, a small, mundane gesture that was terrifying in its normalcy. "It's a shame. You were a brilliant psychiatrist, which is why your file will be so tragically compelling." A promising doctor, under immense stress, develops a persecutory delusion centered on his supervisor. He becomes obsessed with a charismatic, messianic patient, resulting in a shared psychotic episode, culminating in a violent, paranoid outburst and an attempt to sabotage the hospital's communication systems. It's all there. I wrote it myself this morning. It's quite poetic. He had an answer for everything. He was burying me alive under the weight of my own profession. "What about Jacob?" I asked, a cold dread creeping into my heart. "What have you done with him?" "Our time traveler has been transferred," Evans said smoothly, "to a private, long-term care facility better equipped to handle the unique nature of his condition. You'll never see him again. He's gone. Your prophet is gone, Aris. You are all alone. He had taken everything from me. My freedom, my career, my credibility, and now my only ally. I was defeated. The data burst was a minor inconvenience he would smooth over. Jacob was gone, and I would spend the rest of my life in this room, a living testament to my own failure. The fight was over. I had lost." Evans walked to the door. "You'll be very comfortable here," he said, looking back at me one last time. "You'll have plenty of time to think about the difference between saving the world and simply ruining your own." He stepped out, and the heavy door slammed shut, the lock clicking with a deafening finality. I was alone in the silence, the weight of my defeat pressing down on me, suffocating me. Evans was right. I was a child who had played with forces I couldn't understand. It was over. I closed my eyes, a wave of utter despair washing over me. And then I heard it. It started as a faint, almost imperceptible sound from far away. A single, high-pitched whine. Then it was joined by another. And another. It grew louder, a chorus of rising and falling notes, weaving together into an undeniable symphony. It was the sound of sirens. Not one or two, like a local traffic accident. It was dozens. Police cars, fire trucks, ambulances. More sirens than I had ever heard in my life in this quiet coastal town. They weren't passing by on the highway. They were getting closer. They were converging on this hill. They were coming here. My eyes snapped open. I scrambled off the bed and pressed my ear to the cold steel of the door. The sound was unmistakable now, a massive, overwhelming wave of noise. The garbled data burst wasn't a curiosity. It wasn't being dealt with. It was a fire alarm, and the whole world was responding. Evans hadn't won. He had just lost control. The battle for Blackwood Creek Asylum was about to begin. The sirens grew from a distant cry to a deafening roar that seemed to shake the very foundations of the asylum. It was the sound of an army arriving, a wave of righteous fury crashing against the shore of Evans's quiet, orderly conspiracy. I pressed my face against the cool steel of the door, a wild, incredulous hope blooming in my chest. I couldn't see anything, but I could hear everything. I was a blind man listening to the world change. The ordered silence of Ward 7 shattered. I heard running footsteps in the hallway, panicked, confused voices. An internal alarm, a shrill, pulsing klaxon, joined the chorus of the sirens outside. Blackwood Creek Asylum was in chaos. "What's happening?" I heard a junior nurse cry out. "All staff, initiate lockdown protocols. Seal the wards." That was Nurse Miller's voice, strained but still commanding, trying to impose order on a situation that was spiraling out of control. Then I heard him. Evans. His voice was no longer the composed whisper of a predator, but the furious, unrestrained roar of a king whose castle was being stormed. "No. Override the lockdown. Security to the front gate. Hold them back. No one gets in." He was losing. The realization was intoxicating. His fortress was being breached. New sounds joined the cacophony. The heavy rhythmic thud of a battering ram against a distant door, followed by the splintering of wood and shouts. "Police! Search warrant! Hands up!" The voices were sharp, professional, and utterly confident. They were inside. The footsteps in my hallway were heavier now, the sound of combat boots, not soft-soled nursing shoes. I scrambled back to the bed just as the lock on my door, a lock I thought was impregnable, buzzed loudly and clicked open. The heavy door swung inward. A man in full tactical gear stood framed in the doorway, a rifle pointed at my chest. His face was hidden behind a helmet and visor. "On the ground. Hands behind your head. Now," he commanded. Despite my patient scrubs, despite my confinement, I felt no fear of him. He was the cavalry. "My name is Dr. Aris Thorne," I said, my voice hoarse but clear, as I slowly complied. "I work here. I sent the broadcast. I'm being held against my will by the hospital director, Dr. Jonathan Evans. He's the one you're looking for." The officer didn't lower his weapon, but he tilted his head, speaking into his radio. "Command, I have a male in an observation room claiming to be the source of the broadcast. Claims his name is Dr. Aris Thorne." A voice crackled back, too garbled for me to understand. The officer paused, then looked at me. "Stay put." A moment later, a new figure appeared in the doorway. She was a woman in a dark blue windbreaker with FBI emblazoned in yellow letters across the back. She was in her 40s, with sharp, intelligent eyes that took in the entire scene in a single glance. Me on the floor, the stark white room, the tactical officer. She held a tablet in her hand. "You're Dr. Thorne?" she asked, her voice calm and authoritative amidst the chaos. "Yes," I said. She glanced down at her tablet, then back at me, a flicker of confirmation in her eyes. "I'm Special Agent Sullivan. We've been analyzing the data you sent. Schematics for the entire Bay Area power grid. Internal corporate emails from a company called Aethelred, and a very damning video simulation. You've been busy, Doctor." The relief was so absolute it almost brought me to my knees. "It's all real," I said. "Aethelred is planning to trigger a catastrophic blackout. Evans, your Dr. Evans, is on their board of directors. He's behind it all. We're putting that puzzle together," she said, her focus unwavering. "Right now, my priority is securing him." "Where is he?" "He was here," I said, scrambling to my feet. "In this ward. Just minutes ago." "My team is sweeping the grounds," she said into her radio. "I want eyes on the director, Jonathan Evans. He is the primary target." She turned back to me. "You're with me, Doctor. You're our primary witness. Let's go." As I stepped out of the observation room and back into the hallway of Ward 7, the scene was one of controlled chaos. FBI agents and state police officers were securing the ward, their presence a stark, armed contrast to the sterile medical environment. The asylum staff were lined up against the wall, their faces a mixture of confusion and fear. Agent Sullivan led me down the hall. "We need to find Jacob," I said urgently. "The patient from room 713. He's the source of all this. Evans said he had him transferred." There have been no transfers logged from this facility in the last 48 hours, Sullivan replied curtly. If your man is here, we'll find him. We reached the end of the corridor, near Jacob's room, and then we saw him. Dr. Evans stood at the far end of the hall, near the ward's main exit. He was not alone. His calm composure had returned, but it was a terrifying, reptilian stillness. In the crook of his arm, he held Nurse Brenda Miller, and in his other hand, pressed firmly against her throat, was a syringe filled with a clear liquid. Nobody move, Evans commanded, his voice steady and dangerously calm. This syringe is filled with a fast-acting potassium chloride solution. One press of this plunger, and her heart will stop before she hits the floor. We are all going to be very, very still. Agent Sullivan's team raised their weapons. The chaotic hallway fell silent. It wasn't over. The final, desperate battle for Blackwood Creek had just begun. The hallway of Ward 7 became a silent, pressurized stage. The air was thick with the promise of violence. FBI agents held their positions, their weapons trained on Dr. Evans, their movements fluid and economical. Nurse Miller stood rigid in Evans's grip, her face pale but her eyes burning with a cold, defiant fury. She was terrified, but she was not broken. Stand down, Evans. Agent Sullivan's voice was a sharp, commanding crack in the silence. It's over. There is no way out of this room. Evans let out a soft, dry chuckle, a sound utterly devoid of humor. You misunderstand, Agent. I'm not asking for a way out. He adjusted his grip on the syringe, the needle point dimpling the skin of Nurse Miller's throat. I require a secure satellite phone, unmonitored. I need to make one call. You have 5 minutes to provide it, or Mrs. Miller's long and dedicated career comes to a very sudden, very quiet end. He wasn't trying to escape. He was trying to give the final order. He was trying to burn the world down on his way out. We don't negotiate with, Sullivan began, but I cut her off. Don't, I said, stepping forward, my eyes locked on Evans. Sullivan shot me a furious look, but I ignored it. I was back in my own element. This was a psychiatric crisis. The patient was a narcissist with a god complex, and he was decompensating rapidly. Is this really your endgame, Jonathan? I asked, my voice calm, clinical. The great visionary, the man who saw the big picture, reduced to hiding behind a nurse with a needle? It's so common, so predictable. It's the kind of pathetic, desperate move a common street criminal would make. His eyes narrowed, the insult hitting its mark. You know nothing of my motivations, Aris. I know that brilliant men, when they fail, are often the least imaginative, I continued, taking another slow step. You've already lost. The data is out. The authorities are here. Aethelred's stock is probably already in freefall. Your grand surgery has been exposed as a cheap murder for profit. And all you have left is this tawdry little hostage scene. I have to say, I'm disappointed. I thought the man who orchestrated all this would have a more elegant final move. I was chipping away at his ego, the foundation upon which his entire world was built. I could see his knuckles whitening on the syringe. He was losing control. What would you know about elegance? He hissed. I know that this ends with you either in prison for the rest of your life or dead in this hallway, I said. There is no other outcome. Your plan has failed. My plan has not failed, he roared, his voice finally cracking, the mask of composure shattering. It is necessary. It was at that moment, as his rage peaked, that a new voice joined the drama. It was a voice of impossible calm, a voice that cut through the tension like a cool breeze. He's right, Jonathan. It's over. Everyone turned. Standing at the entrance to the ward, flanked by 2 bewildered-looking tactical officers, was Jacob. He hadn't been transferred. He hadn't been harmed. He was here. He walked slowly down the hallway, his patient scrubs a stark contrast to the agent's body armor, his gaze fixed solely on Dr. Evans. He was completely unafraid. Stay back! Evans shrieked, his attention now fractured between me, the agents, and this impossible man. Jacob stopped about 20 feet away. He ignored the gun, the hostage, the syringe. He looked at Evans with an expression of profound, almost sorrowful, pity. The Aethelred plan was always a failure, Jacob said, his voice soft but carrying in the silent hall. Historically, it's known as the Aethelred blunder, a classic case of corporate hubris that led to the largest market correction of the decade. Your partners will betray you to save themselves. Your name will become a cautionary tale. Evans stared at him, his face a mask of disbelief. You're insane. But that isn't what you'll be remembered for, Jacob continued, his voice dropping slightly, becoming more personal. Not really. Your true legacy is Anna. Evans flinched as if he'd been struck. The name hung in the air, a secret suddenly exposed to the light. I saw Nurse Miller's eyes widen slightly. I had no idea who Anna was, but Evans clearly did. Your daughter, Jacob said, his voice full of a strange tenderness. The private research you've been funding for her congenital condition, you've kept it a secret from everyone. You did it all for her, didn't you? All this power, all this money, you thought it would save her. Tears welled in Evans's eyes. His entire body began to tremble. How could you know that? He whispered. Because I have seen the world that comes after this one, Jacob said. And I have seen her name in it. The gene therapy works, Jonathan. It's successful beyond your wildest dreams. Anna lives to be 97 years old. She has children and grandchildren. She lives a long, full, beautiful life. But her story only happens if you put down that syringe. Right now. The impossible, intimate knowledge was a force more powerful than any weapon. It struck at the very heart of Evans's motivation, the secret, human reason behind his monstrous ambition. He stared at Jacob, his mind clearly broken by a truth he couldn't comprehend but a hope he desperately wanted to believe. His hand, the one holding the syringe, trembled and began to lower. In that instant of hesitation, Nurse Miller acted. She drove her heel down hard on his instep and threw her head back, slamming it into his nose. Evans cried out in pain and surprise, his grip loosening. The syringe flew from his hand, skittering across the floor. And the world erupted in motion as the FBI team surged forward. The chaos in the hallway resolved as quickly as it had begun. As the FBI agents swarmed forward, Dr. Evans did not fight back. He simply crumpled, all the terrible energy leaving him at once, and sank to the floor amidst the agents. The fight was gone, his mind shattered by an impossible truth about a future he had been trying to build and a daughter he was trying to save. He was just a man, broken and defeated. Nurse Miller, shaking but unharmed, was led away by a paramedic. As she passed me, she met my gaze, and in her eyes, I saw a look of profound, weary understanding. She had been a guardian of the rules, but in the end, she had bent them for the right reason. The hours that followed were a blur of organized chaos. The asylum became a federal crime scene. Agents methodically went room to room, securing data and interviewing staff. Evans was taken away in handcuffs, his face a gray, empty mask. It was a quiet, anticlimactic end for a man who had planned to plunge millions into darkness. Agent Sullivan found me in the asylum's small staff lounge, a cup of coffee in my trembling hands. The dominoes are falling faster than we can count, she said, her voice tired but energized. The Aethelred board is in full panic mode. Arrests are being made in 3 states. Your data burst didn't just start a fire, Doctor. It was a firestorm. You averted a crisis that would have set this country back 20 years. It wasn't me, I said, looking through the lounge window toward Ward 7. It was him. Sullivan followed my gaze. The man who calls himself Jacob, she said, her professional curiosity piqued. We ran his prints, his facial recognition, his DNA. Nothing. He doesn't exist. So you tell me, Doctor, off the record, who is he? This was my final choice. I could tell her the literal truth and condemn Jacob to a life as a laboratory specimen in some government black site. Or I could protect the man who had saved us. He is, I said, choosing my words with care, a phenomenon. I believe he's a savant of the highest order, a mind that processes information in ways we can't begin to comprehend. His delusion of being from the future is the only metaphor his psyche could create to explain his own impossible intuition. He's not a threat, Agent. He's the man who saw the storm coming when everyone else was looking at blue skies. Sullivan studied my face for a long moment, then nodded slowly. A savant, she repeated, as if trying the idea on for size. All right, Doctor. For now, we'll go with that. She knew it was an incomplete answer, but it was one that would fit neatly in a file. It was enough. Later that afternoon, after giving my preliminary statement, I went to find him. I walked back into the now quiet hallway of Ward 7 and stood at the door to room 713. I knocked. Come in, Aris, his calm voice called out. He was standing by the window, looking out at the cypress trees. The bars on his window now seemed like a strange, unnecessary relic. The world he had saved was just outside. Is it over? I asked. This part is, he said, turning to face me. The timeline has been corrected. Aethelred will be broken up. The vulnerability in the grid will be repaired. And Jonathan Evans, from his prison cell, will devote his remaining resources to funding the research that will, in time, save his daughter's life. So it was true, I whispered. About Anna. All of it, he confirmed. A small truth to avert a catastrophic lie. That was my purpose. What happens now? I asked. To you. A sad, gentle smile touched his lips. My work is done. The changes I was sent to make have been set in motion. It's time for me to go. Go where? I asked, a sudden sense of loss washing over me. They'll let you go. Where will you go? Not a place you can find on a map, he said softly. He walked toward me and extended his hand. I shook it. His grip was firm, real. Thank you, Aris Thorne. You were profiled as a man of logic, a man who would not believe. But I saw something else. I saw a man who, when presented with an impossible truth, would have the courage to question his own reality. You did not fail. He dropped his hand and simply looked at me, his pale blue eyes holding a universe of knowledge and a deep, ancient weariness. Be well, my friend, he said. I nodded, unable to speak. I turned and left the room, closing the door behind me. I stood in the hallway for a moment, then knew I had to ask him one more thing. I opened the door again. The room was empty. The window was closed and locked. The bed was neatly made. There was no sign that anyone had been there at all. Jacob was gone. 3 months have passed. The Aethelred scandal, as Jacob predicted, became the story of the decade. I was cleared of all involvement, and my testimony was central to the government's case. I retrieved my laptop from the woods, its secrets now the property of federal prosecutors. I resigned from Blackwood Creek Asylum the day after the raid. I stand now on a cliff overlooking the Pacific, the same ocean I watched from my office window for years. But the world looks different now. My rigid, scientific certainty is gone, replaced by a quiet sense of wonder. I don't know what the future holds for me. I don't know if I'll ever practice psychiatry again. But I know that the universe is far larger, stranger, and more beautiful than I ever believed. Last week, I read a small article in a financial journal. An anonymous philanthropic trust, managed by the estate of a disgraced CEO, had just awarded a massive grant to a small biotech firm specializing in gene therapy. The article called it an act of strange, late-life repentance. I looked out at the endless horizon, and for the first time in a long time, I smiled. The patient in Ward 7 was gone, but his message, his warning, and his impossible hope remained. And I, the doctor who had been assigned to cure him, had been the one who was truly saved.